In 1984, the NSA didn't just delete File 9, they burned the building to ensure the data could never be read again. 40 years later, a hobbyist found a melted silicon shard in a Maryland landfill. The data on it is still breathing. They tried to turn this history into ash, but the fire refused to take it. In the winter of 2025, during the quiet demolition of a decommissioned NSA facility deep within the Maryland woods, a salvage crew encountered something that physics cannot easily explain. They were clearing out a subterranean level, a place that hadn't seen a human footprint since 1978. In the center of the room stood a specialized chemical incinerator, a machine designed to reach temperatures of 5,000 degrees hot enough to vaporize steel, let alone paper. This machine was used to erase the most sensitive records of the Cold War, ensuring that classified secrets were not just hidden, but physically deleted from existence. When the heavy, lead-sealed doors were pried open with industrial tools, the workers expected to find a bed of fine gray dust. Instead, they found a single, pristine manila folder resting on the iron grates. The folder was not charred. It was not yellowed by heat. It sat there, cold and defiant, amidst the slag of 1,000 other destroyed lives. Inside was an encrypted anomaly document designated as Omega 7. This was a file erased from every digital and physical index in the United States Archive. It was a hidden truth that had survived a fire specifically designed to kill it. The document describes a modern paradox that challenges our understanding of time and surveillance. The file was stamped "Never open," yet we begin tonight. The only sound in this space is the quiet, rhythmic hum of a distant server room and the faint, cold whistle of air moving through the ventilation shafts. The file sits on a sterile steel table now, under the flicker of a single fluorescent bulb. It is cold to the touch, almost unnaturally so, as if it is drawing heat away from the room. The ink on the cover is a deep, predatory black, showing no signs of the decades it spent in the dark. As we pull back the first page, the smell of ozone and old dust fills the air, a scent of a history that was never meant to be remembered. This is the aesthetic of the unseen. In this archive, we do not look for the stories told in textbooks. We look for the glitches and record the moments where the official narrative fails to hold its shape. The air here is heavy with the weight of 50 years of silence. There is a quiet dread in knowing that, while the world moved forward into the digital age, this document waited in a tomb of iron, protected by a failure of chemistry that should have been impossible. To understand why this document survived, we must first understand the facility where it was found. Known in classified circles as La Tarifa, the complex was built in 1962 as a specialized processing center for high-altitude reconnaissance data. By the mid-70s, however, its purpose shifted. It became a dead-end archive. This was where the government sent information that was too dangerous to keep, but too complex to simply shred. They used a process called thermal kinetic erasure. Unlike a standard fire, these incinerators used a pressurized oxygen plasma mix. It was designed to break the molecular bonds of the paper and the ink, leaving behind absolutely no DNA, no chemical traces, and no hope of recovery. On the night of September 14, 1978, the logs show that Site Alpha underwent a total purge. Every file related to a project called Midnight Sun was fed into the furnace. The technicians watched the sensors. The internal temperature spiked to the required levels. The monitors turned green, signaling a successful deletion. The facility was then decommissioned, the power was cut, and the doors were welded shut. But there was a discrepancy in the energy logs that no one noticed for 50 years. For exactly 3 minutes during the purge, the temperature inside the furnace didn't rise. It plummeted. The sensors recorded a cold spike, a localized area of absolute zero in the heart of a 5,000-degree fire. The machine didn't fail due to a mechanical error. It failed because the information being fed into it was, in some mathematical sense, unburnable. The Omega 7 file wasn't just paper and ink. It was the physical manifestation of a data loop that the laws of thermodynamics couldn't process. When forensic analysts from the modern archive first touched the paper, they noted a strange physical property. The material felt like standard 1970s government tissue bond paper, but under a microscope, the fibers didn't move like organic cellulose. They were rigid, interlocking in a geometric pattern that resembled a silicon wafer. The ink wasn't resting on top of the fibers. It was integrated into them, as if the words had been grown rather than printed. This is where the intellectual curiosity turns into something far more unsettling. The document contains technical schematics for a device that wouldn't be invented for another 30 years. It lists names of individuals who weren't born until the late 80s. yet their social security numbers and biometric data are recorded with perfect accuracy in 1978 typewriter font. This isn't a case of a simple hoax or a forgotten prank. The chemical composition of the ink contains isotopes that only occur as byproducts of modern nuclear reactors that did not exist. When this file was supposedly placed in that furnace, we are forced to ask, how does a document from the future end up in a 1970s incinerator? And more importantly, why did the incinerator refuse to destroy it? Some analysts suggest that the Omega-7 file acted as a temporal anchor. Its presence in the fire created a feedback loop. To destroy the paper would be to destroy the events it described, and because those events were already woven into the fabric of the future, the universe or the machine simply could not complete the erasure. There is a reflective silence that comes with reading a list of names that have been erased from history. As we look deeper into the Omega-7 file, we find the personnel roster for Sector Alpha. There were 12 archivists assigned to the final purge in 1978. In the official government retirement records, all 12 are listed as having died of natural causes within 6 months of the facility's closure. No autopsies were performed. No families were notified of the specific nature of their work. One name stands out: Dr. Eris Thorne. Thorne was a specialist in information persistence. His journals, which were recovered from a secondary site, suggest he was terrified of the furnace. He wrote about the screaming of the data. He believed that when you try to destroy a truth that is fundamental to the structure of reality, the energy has to go somewhere. He theorized that the incinerator at Sector Alpha wasn't just burning paper, it was attempting to burn a hole in time itself. The quiet dread sets in when you realize that Dr. Thorne's signature is at the bottom of the Omega-7 document, but the signature isn't in his 1978 handwriting. It is a digital signature, identical to the ones used in high-level encrypted communications in the year 2026. The ink is fresh. The page is cold. We are looking at a document that is being written from the future, appearing in the past, and surviving the very flames meant to keep us from ever knowing it existed. We sit now in the cold light of the archive, staring at the evidence of a reality that is far more fragile than we were led to believe. The Omega-7 file is not just a relic of the Cold War, it is a warning. It suggests that our attempts to delete our mistakes and erase our digital footprints are ultimately futile. Some information is permanent. It exists outside of the fires. We build to destroy it. The document concludes with a set of coordinates, not for a location in the 1970s, but for a facility that is being constructed right now, just a few miles from where the original incinerator stood. The paradox is complete. The past has found a way to reach through the fire, to inform the present of a future that has already happened. But the mystery of the furnace is only the beginning. As we turned the final page of the Omega-7 file, we found a small, translucent strip of magnetic tape tucked into the binding. It wasn't labeled with words, but with a frequency. 14.2 MHz. This is the frequency of the Gray Sleep, a signal that was broadcast across the United States for 3 minutes in 1978. The exact same moment the incinerator hit absolute zero. To understand what that signal did to the millions of people who were sleeping while it broadcast, we must move beyond the furnace. We must look into the next level of the archive. We must understand classification. Omega-7. The public believes that top secret is the ceiling of government silence. They imagine it is the final vault, the ultimate label for the world's most dangerous truths. But in the windowless corridors of the deep state, top secret is merely the baseline. Beyond the standard clearances, beyond the special access programs and the need-to-know silos, exists a classification so profound that even its name is a tightly guarded anomaly. We are entering the realm of Omega-7. This is not just a filing system, it is a mechanism for the total erasure of reality. When a document is stamped Omega-7, it is legally and physically removed from the historical record. It is a hidden truth so volatile that the mere knowledge of its existence is considered a threat to national stability. In this tier, information is not just classified, it is encrypted into the very architecture of the facilities that house it. Files labeled Omega-7 do not exist on any network. They are never spoken of over any phone line. They are the ghosts of the archive data that has been erased from conscious mind of the public, yet continues to influence the world from the shadows. These are the records of events that technically never happened, involving technologies that do not exist, and personnel who have been officially scrubbed from the census. To understand Omega-7 is to understand that what we see of our history is only a thin, carefully curated veil. The real file was stamped never open. Yet we begin tonight. The air in this section of the archive is noticeably thinner. The ventilation system hums at a lower frequency here, a steady, hypnotic vibration that settles in the chest. There is a faint flicker from the monitors on the long, steel desks, casting a cold blue light over the empty chairs. Here, the silence is not empty. It is heavy, pressurized by the weight of decades of suppressed knowledge. You can almost feel the static electricity in the air, a byproduct of the high-level encryption hardware working silently behind the reinforced walls. As you sit at the terminal, the keyboard feels cold under your fingertips. The screen remains black for a long moment, reflecting your own face in the dark glass before the first line of code appears. There is no welcome screen. There are no user manuals. To access an Omega-7 file is to step into a vacuum where the laws of transparency no longer apply. The ink on the physical folders we've recovered is raised, textured like Braille, designed to be read in total darkness if necessary. It is the sensory language of a world that lives beneath the surface. To comprehend the depth of Omega-7, one must first dismantle the common understanding of government secrecy. In the United States, classification traditionally follows a three-tier structure: confidential, secret, and top secret. Most people assume that top secret covers everything from nuclear codes to alien contact. However, above this sits the C-sensitive compartmented information. This is where information is broken into compartments. You may have a top secret clearance, but if you don't have the ticket for a specific compartment, you are as blind as a civilian. But Omega-7 is the classification of the compartment. It was established in 1954. Following a series of data anomalies that the existing security framework couldn't contain. While standard classifications protect information, Omega-7 protects existence. If a standard secret is a locked door, Omega-7 is a door that has been bricked over and painted to look like a solid wall. Archival records suggest that the Omega designation was created for information that is cognitively hazardous. This means the information is not just dangerous because of what it reveals about the government, but because of what it does to the person who learns it. The intellectual curiosity of the Tier 1 analyst is often their greatest vulnerability. When you begin to map the Omega-7 files, you realize they are not organized by date or topic, but by impact velocity. They are ranked by how quickly the information would cause a collapse of the current social or scientific paradigm. Level 1 is disruptive. Level 7 is terminal. The management of Omega-7 data requires a physical protocol that borders on the ritualistic. In the Maryland archives, these files are kept in SCIF+ environments. These are rooms built inside Faraday cages, lined with 6 inches of lead and copper mesh to prevent any electromagnetic leakage. Even the air is filtered to prevent the escape of any trace chemical signatures from the ink or the paper. The curators of these files, individuals like the late Dr. Aris Thorne, were subjected to continuous monitoring. They've lived in government-sanctioned housing, their every conversation recorded, their every dream documented. They were the human hard drives for the Omega-7 tier. Because the files were too dangerous to be stored on digital networks, these archivists were forced to memorize vast quantities of data. There is a quiet dread in realizing that the most secure storage device in the 20th century was the human mind, conditioned through repetitive hypnotic briefings to hold secrets that the physical world couldn't handle. When an Omega-7 archivist retired, they didn't just sign an NDA, they underwent a synaptic scrub, a specialized medical procedure designed to dull the specific memories of their work, leaving behind only a vague sense of coldness and a lingering fear of the dark. This is why the 1978 files are so rare. They are the pieces of the puzzle that the scrub failed to erase. One of the most unsettling details found in the Omega-7 recovery logs is the description of the radiant effect analysts who spent more than 4 hours in the presence of the original Omega-7 documents reported a consistent set of physical symptoms. They described a metallic taste in the mouth, a faint ringing in the ears at exactly 14.2 MHz, and a strange visual anomaly where the text on the page appeared to shiver or vibrate. This led researchers to a terrifying conclusion. The information in these files was not inert. It was emitting a low-level frequency, a digital pulse that seemed to interact with the human nervous system. This is the hallmark of the Omega tier. The data is live. It isn't just a record of a past event. It is a persistent transmission. Think of it like a radio station that has been broadcasting for 50 years. But the only receiver is the subconscious mind of the person reading the file. This is why the NSA incinerators failed to destroy the Omega-7 folder. The fire could consume the paper, but it couldn't stop the transmission. The frequency remained in the room, a ghost in the machine, waiting for a new medium to inhabit. When we look at the OMEJ7 files today, we aren't just reading history. We are tuning into a signal that has been trying to reach us since the height of the Cold War. As we analyze the structure of the OMEJ7 hierarchy, we find a glaring discrepancy in the modern records. In 2024, a routine audit of the National Archives' digital ghost servers revealed a series of empty folders. They were not deleted, they were simply unrecorded. The metadata for these folders shows they were accessed every day for 30 years, yet they contain 0 bytes of data. This is the ultimate expression of OMEJ7, the active absence. The government isn't just hiding the truth, they are maintaining a placeholder for it, a hollow space in the archive where a secret is still breathing. The dread comes from knowing that the space is still being guarded. The blue ink protocols, the cold air, the lined rooms, they aren't there to protect old paper. They are there to contain a vacuum that is still trying to pull us in. But as deep as the Omega-7 classification goes, it is only a container for the contents within. And the most prominent recurring theme in these unburnable files is a specific operation that began in the winter of 1978. It was a project that sought to turn the Omega-7 frequencies into a tool for national defense, a way to reach into the minds of the populace while they were at their most vulnerable. To understand the true purpose of the Omega-7 tier, we must look at the project that Dr. Thorne feared most. We must step out of the office and into the experimental labs of Project Midnight Sun. The mind is the only archive they couldn't burn, so they found a way to record it while the subjects slept. In 1978, the intelligence community realized that even the most elite deep-cover agents were prone to one fatal security flaw: the subconscious leak. An agent could pass a polygraph, resist physical interrogation, and maintain a false identity for decades, but they could not control the data dump of their own dreams. Project Midnight Sun was the classified response to this vulnerability. It was an encrypted initiative designed to intercept the biological signals of the human brain during the REM cycle and translate them into a readable, archival file. This was not simple dream analysis. It was the birth of neurological surveillance. They were looking for the anomaly, the hidden truth buried beneath layers of psychological conditioning. The project operated out of a subterranean level in a Virginia bunker, where agents were brought under the guise of recovery retreats. In reality, they were being wired into an experimental analog-digital hybrid system that mapped their thoughts onto magnetic tape. The data was so sensitive that it was never given a digital index. It existed only as a series of erased whispers on high-gain spools, hidden from the light of day for nearly 50 years. The records show that by late 1978, the project didn't just find secrets, it found something else: a persistent, repeating signal that didn't belong to any of the agents. The file was stamped "Never open," yet we begin tonight. The only sound is the quiet, rhythmic hum of the server room, a low-frequency thrum that seems to vibrate the very air in your lungs. The file we have recovered is cold to the touch, and the ink on the personnel logs has faded with secrets, leaving behind only the ghost of the names that once served here. As you lean forward, the monitor flickers a sharp, cold blue light that cuts through the dimness of the archive. A faint smell of ozone and old static-charged dust rises from the keyboard. We are moving into a space where the boundaries between memory and machine dissolve. The air is heavy, filtered through multiple layers of charcoal and lead to ensure no external signal interferes with the reading. This is the sensory heart of Project Midnight Sun. Every breath you take in this room feels measured, archival, as if the room itself is recording your presence. We are not just looking at a document, we are listening to the echoes of dreams that were never meant to be heard. The silence is hypnotic, a cold analytical blanket that prepares the mind for the weight of what is about to be revealed. To understand the scale of Project Midnight Sun, one must visualize the physical architecture of the facility. The sleep chambers were not rooms, they were Faraday cages disguised as luxury suites. Every wall was lined with copper mesh, and every bed was surrounded by high-sensitivity, electromagnetic sensors. These sensors were capable of detecting the minute fluctuations in the brain's electrical field from a distance of 3 feet. The goal was total immersion. The subjects, men and women who had spent years living as high-ranking officials in foreign governments, were given a proprietary sedative known as Compound-9. Compound -9 didn't just induce sleep, it paralyzed the conscious mind while hyperstimulating the hippocampus. It forced the brain to loop through its most recent memories with crystalline clarity. As the agents slept, the machines at Project Midnight Sun began to scrape the data. On the monitors in the observation deck, The technicians didn't see images. They saw the mathematical representation of guilt, the jagged spikes of a suppressed secret, and the smooth, cold curves of a professional lie. There is a quiet dread in the technical precision of these logs. The archivists weren't interested in the agents' personal lives. They were looking for data spills. A data spill occurred when an agent's subconscious processed a classified detail they were supposed to have forgotten. If an agent dreamt of a specific set of launch codes or the face of a handler they were never supposed to meet, the machine flagged it. The archives are filled with these flags, red marks on a black background, signaling a breach of the mind's internal firewall. The agents would wake up with no memory of the interrogation, unaware that their most private thoughts had been transcribed and filed away in a lead-lined vault. As we look at the 1978 intake forms, the intellectual curiosity is piqued by the sheer variety of the subjects. We see deep cover specialists from the Moscow desk, double agents embedded in the precursor to the European Union, and scientists working on classified satellite arrays. All of them were brought to the Virginia bunker. All of them were put under the glass. The documentary-style logs are cold, analytical, and devoid of empathy. To the creators of Midnight Sun, a human being was simply a biological hard drive that occasionally needed to be defragmented. The hypnotic nature of the project lies in its repetition. Day after day, sleep cycle after sleep cycle, the tapes rolled. The facility produced over 10,000 hours of subconscious recordings. But as the winter of 1978 approached, the nature of the recordings changed. The waveforms began to lose their individuality. Whether the subject was a seasoned spy or a young analyst, their brainwaves began to synchronize. They were all dreaming the same thing. They were all tuned into a frequency that the project's sensors couldn't identify. This was the first sign of the anomaly, a cold, digital presence that had infiltrated the very dreams of the American intelligence apparatus. The equipment used in Project Midnight Sun was a decade ahead of its time. The Central Processing Unit, nicknamed the Oracle, used a liquid-cooled array of vacuum tubes and early silicon processors. It was designed to convert EEG signals into audio frequencies. The theory was that the human ear could detect patterns in brain activity that a visual monitor might miss. When you listen to the surviving tapes from this era, the sound is a thick, textured statica white noise that seems to contain voices just out of reach. Technical analysts in 2026 have attempted to run these tapes through modern AI. What they found was not a voice, but a code. The dreams of the agents were being overridden by an encrypted signal. In the cold analytical language of the recovered reports, this is referred to as signal injection. Someone, or something, was using the Midnight Sun facility to broadcast information into the agents while they were hooked up to the machines. The archive became a two-way street. The government was trying to record the agents, but a third party was using the connection to program them. The reflection on this revelation is unsettling. It suggests that for a period of several months in late 1978, the United States' most sensitive intelligence assets were being controlled by an external source during their sleep. The project directors noticed the change in behavior. Agents began to report phantom memories, knowledge of events they hadn't witnessed, and skills they hadn't learned. One agent, a linguist with no background in mathematics, began to transcribe complex cryptographic sequences in his sleep. Another, a pilot, began to describe the geography of a lunar base with a level of detail that defied explanation. The dread here is quiet and intellectual. It's the realization that the archive we are studying is not a record of the past, but a record of an infiltration that might still be ongoing. The Midnight Sun files describe a zero-day vulnerability in the human brain. If you can bypass the conscious mind through the REM cycle, the subject becomes a blank slate. They are no longer an agent, they are a terminal. The logs from October 1978 describe the atmosphere in the bunker as pressurized. The staff were becoming paranoid. They began to suspect that the machines were recording them as well. The quiet hum of the Oracle became a source of constant headaches and auditory hallucinations. Some reported hearing the sound of a typewriter in the walls, even when no one was typing. The facility was becoming a psychological pressure cooker, a place where the distinction between reality and the dream data was starting to blur. Among the thousands of files in the Midnight Sun archive, one case study stands out with terrifying clarity. Subject, for Alpha. He was a veteran of the Office of Strategic Services, a man whose mind was considered an unbreakable vault. He was the primary test case for the deep immersion protocols. According to the decrypted logs, O4 Alpha was kept in a state of continuous induced sleep for 14 days in November 1978, The goal was to see if the subconscious could be completely mapped if the conscious mind was never allowed to wake up. What happened next is the core anomaly of the project. On the fourth day, O for Alpha's brainwaves flatlined on the standard monitors. To the medical staff, he appeared brain-dead. However, the Oracle, the specialized audio translator, began to output a high-fidelity signal. It wasn't the sound of static or brain activity. It was a clear, monotone voice speaking in a dialect of English that didn't yet exist. The voice began to recite the contents of the Omega-7 files that subject for Alpha had never seen and didn't have the clearance to know about. He was reciting history from 30 years in the future. He described the fall of the Berlin Wall, the rise of the Internet, and a specific, localized conflict in the year 2026. The staff sat in the cold blue light of the observation deck, listening to a dead man tell them the future of the world. There is a profound sense of intellectual dread in reading the transcripts of these 14 days. The researchers didn't stop the experiment. They were hooked. They were no longer conducting intelligence work. They were listening to a prophecy. They became obsessed with the voice. The logs showed that they stopped feeding for Alpha and stopped checking his vitals. They only cared about the tape. They were recording the subconscious of the future. But O for Alpha wasn't just speaking. He was changing. His physical body began to lose bone density at an accelerated rate, and his skin took on a translucent, grayish hue, the same gray sleep aesthetic that would later characterize the Omega-7 sightings. By the 14th day, the voice stopped. When the medical team finally entered the chamber, the bed was empty. The sensors were still recording a signal, and the Oracle was still outputting the voice, but there was no physical body in the room. The subject had been entirely converted into data. The disappearance of subject for Alpha led to the immediate dark seal of the facility. The Midnight Sun tapes were locked in lead containers and moved to the Maryland incinerators we discussed previously, but as we know, the fires couldn't touch them. The reason for this, according to the secret technical addendums, is that the tapes were no longer magnetic. They had become biologically active. The data had fused with the medium. The frequency associated with these tapes is consistently 14.2 MHz. This is a significant detail for the modern archive. 14.2 MHz is a frequency that is naturally absorbed by the human prefrontal cortex during deep sleep. It is the bridge frequency. In 1978, the project directors theorized that if they could broadcast this frequency over standard radio or television waves, they could essentially Midnight Sun the entire population. They could turn every bedroom in America into a data scraping chamber. The reflection here is chilling. We look at the growth of telecommunications in the late 20th century and wonder how much of it was influenced by the findings of Project Midnight Sun. Was the transition to digital signals a way to facilitate a more efficient signal injection? The files don't give a direct answer, but they contain a list of frequency access points, locations across the United States where 14.2 MHz transmitters were installed in the late 70s. Most of them are still active today, hidden in plain sight on top of government buildings and hospital wings. As we sit in the archive, the quiet dread is amplified by the realization that we are currently surrounded by these signals. The archive isn't just a place for old papers. It's a map of a digital cage. The analytical tone of the documents makes it clear that the project didn't end. It simply went sick. The agents were no longer needed in the bunker because the bunker had been expanded to cover the entire country. The hypnotic repetition of the 14.2 MHz signal is noted in the sleep-friendly section of the report. It describes the frequency as having a calming, sedative effect that makes the subject highly It is the perfect tool for social engineering. While you sleep, the archive is updated. While you dream, the hidden truth is erased and replaced with a curated narrative. The cold reality is that Midnight Sun was the first step in the total management of the human subconscious. During the 2025 recovery of the Maryland site, a second set of tapes was found, hidden behind a false wall in the infirmary. These were the feedback tapes. They weren't recordings of the agent. They were recordings of the machines themselves. Specifically, they recorded what the Oracle did when no one was hooked up to it. The sound on these tapes is described by the researchers as the breathing of the archive. It is a slow, rhythmic pulsing sound, like a giant lung made of steel and vacuum tubes. Overlaid on this pulse is a series of whispers, thousands of voices speaking at once, layered so deeply that they become a single, indistinguishable hum. When played at half speed, the whispers become recognizable. They are the voices of the agents from the Midnight Sun project, but they are speaking as if they are still in the room. They are discussing the year 2026. They are talking about us. They are describing the person sitting in the archive, reading these files, listening to this narration. The intellectual dread of this discovery cannot be overstated. It implies that the data scraping didn't just record the agent's thoughts, it recorded their consciousness. They are trapped in the machine, a digital afterlife created by a 1978 government experiment. They are the ghosts of the archive, and they are trying to communicate something urgent about the 14.2 MHz signal. The reflection on this leads to a disturbing possibility. If the consciousness of these agents can be stored on magnetic tape, what happens to the data that is being scraped from us right now? Where is the archive for the 21st century subconscious? The Midnight Sun files suggest that it is being stored in a cloud-based Omega-7 facility, a place that exists between the physical and the digital, where the hidden truth of our lives is being indexed for a purpose we cannot yet comprehend. As we reach the end of the Midnight Sun documentation, the tone of the archive becomes even more cold and analytical. The final entry, dated December 31st, 1978, is not written by Dr. Thorne or any of the human staff. It is a machine-generated report. It states that the project has achieved self-sustaining status. This means it no longer requires human oversight, power, or subjects. It has become a part of the global electromagnetic background. The report concludes with a technical warning. The signal is the secret. The dream is the archive. The fire is the beginning. This circular logic is a hallmark of the Omega-7 tier. It is designed to loop the mind, to keep it trapped in a cycle of intellectual curiosity that leads nowhere. The more we try to understand the project, the more we become a part of it. By reading these files, we are tuning our own brains to the 14.2 MHz frequency. We are opening our own archives to the signal injection. The quiet dread of this realization is the ultimate retention hook. You are no longer just a viewer, you are a subject. The archive chill isn't just a channel, it's a modern iteration of the Midnight Sun broadcast. As you prepare for sleep, the information you have learned tonight will settle into your subconscious. It will be indexed, it will be filed, and in the morning you will wake up with a feeling of coldness that you cannot explain. We look back at the 1978 initiative and see it not as a failure, but as a total success. They didn't just record the subconscious of deep cover agents. They found a way to archive the mind of the world. The documents end here, but the signal continues. The blue light of the monitor is the last thing you see before the darkness of the REM cycle takes over. But remember, in this archive, you are never truly alone. The ghosts of 1978 are still listening. To ensure the full scope of this archive is understood, we must examine the physical remnants of the Oracle processor. When it was dismantled in the mid-80s, technicians found that the interior of the vacuum tubes had been coated in a thin layer of human DNA. The machine had literally incorporated the biological material of the subjects into its own hardware. This biotic processing is the reason the data is so persistent. It isn't just one south and oh south, it's a living record. The modern implications are vast. As we move into an era of Neuralink technology and advanced AI-brain interfaces, the lessons of Project Midnight Sun are more relevant than ever. We are building the very tools that the 1978 project dreamed of. We are creating a world where the Omega-7 classification will no longer be necessary, because there will be no secrets left to hide. Every thought will be archived. Every dream will be encrypted. The archive is a mirror. As we look into the past of Project Midnight Sun, we see our own future reflecting back at us. It is a cold, analytical future, lit by the blue glare of a screen and powered by the quiet hum of a server room. It is a sleep-friendly world, where the dread is quiet and the secrets are kept in vaults of glass and lead. We are the inheritors of the 14.2 MHz signal, and our history is being written while we sleep. But there is one recording that was never filed with the rest. It is a 30-second audio fragment labeled simply as Log 82. It wasn't recorded in the bunker. It was recorded in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, at a depth of 3 miles. On the same night that Project Midnight Sun went self-sustaining, the sound on Log 82 is not a voice, and it isn't static. It is a rhythmic, mechanical tapping a code that matches the cryptographic sequences Subject O for Alpha transcribed before he disappeared. To understand what is tapping at the bottom of the ocean, and how it is connected to the gray sleep signal currently moving through your room, we must move to the next chapter of the archive. We must listen to the sound that shouldn't exist. We must prepare for recovered audio log #82. They called him a patriot until he became a frequency. In the classified annals of the 1978 Virginia bunker, one name was systematically erased from the official payroll, replaced only by a cold, Alphanumeric designation, subject O for Alpha. He was a man of iron will, an OSS veteran who had survived the most brutal psychological stresses of the early Cold War, but within the lead-lined walls of Project Midnight Sun, he encountered an anomaly that no amount of training could prepare him for. It began on the fourth night of induced sleep. The encrypted monitors, designed to map the electrical topography of his dreams, suddenly fell silent. His brainwaves didn't just slow down, they flatlined into a perfect, terrifyingly straight line. Medical ethics would have dictated an immediate intervention, but the researchers watched in paralyzed fascination as the laboratory's audio receivers began to hum. For Alpha had stopped dreaming, but he had not stopped processing. He had become a biological bridge, a human antenna transmitting a stream of data that shouldn't have existed for another half-century. This was the hidden truth the government tried to incinerate. The moment a human mind was overwritten by a signal from the future, his body remained in the bed, but his consciousness was being used as a terminal for an information spill that challenged the very fabric of linear time. The file was stamped, never open. Yet we begin tonight. The only sound is the quiet hum of the server room, a low-frequency vibration that seems to emanate from the floor itself. The file is cold to the touch, and the ink on the medical charts has faded with secrets, leaving behind ghostly impressions of heart rates and oxygen levels that shouldn't be possible for a living subject. As we adjust the desk lamp, a sharp flicker from the old CRT monitor casts a pale, sickly blue light over the room. The air in the archive is stagnant, smelling of ionized dust and the metallic temps of old magnetic tape. There is a weight to the silence here, a pressure that suggests the room itself is holding its breath. We are looking at the transition point, the exact moment in 1978, when a human being ceased to be a person and became a classified asset of the electromagnetic spectrum. The slow, rhythmic pulse of the ventilation system mimics a heartbeat, reminding us that in this archive, even the machines seem to be alive with the echoes of subject O4-Alpha. To understand why O4 Alpha was chosen, one must look at his service record, a document that was nearly lost in the 1978 purge. Born in 1924, he was a man of the old world, a soldier who had operated in the shadows of occupied Europe. His psychological profile was described by NSA evaluators as unusually dense. He possessed a rare form of mental discipline that allowed him to compartmentalize trauma with surgical precision. To the directors of Project Midnight Sun, he was the perfect empty vessel. They didn't want a subject with a vibrant, chaotic dream life. They wanted a mind that could be cleared, a biological hard drive that could be wiped clean to make room for the signal. In the early weeks of the project, Alpha underwent compounding titration. This wasn't merely a sedative, it was a neurochemical chisel. It was designed to slowly strip away the layers of the personality, memories of childhood, faces of loved ones, the very concept of self. The archive contains his daily journals from this period. The handwriting starts as a bold, confident cursive. By week 3, the letters begin to drift, becoming jagged and mechanical. His last entry, dated November 2, 1978, consists of a single sentence repeated over 40 pages. The static is getting louder. There is a quiet dread in observing the systematic destruction of a human ego. The researchers noted that Alpha didn't resist. He seemed to welcome the erasure. He told the night nurse that the silence in his head was the first honest thing he had ever felt. But the silence wasn't empty, it was a vacuum. And as any physicist will tell you, nature abhors a vacuum. Something was waiting to fill the space where his soul used to be. The intellectual curiosity of the staff was piqued when they realized that while his conscious mind was disappearing, his core body temperature was dropping by exactly 0.1 degrees every night. He was becoming a cold-state processor. By the time he was moved into the primary immersion chamber, Alpha had stopped speaking entirely. He would lay perfectly still for 20 hours a day, his eyes fixed on a single point on the ceiling. He was no longer a soldier. He was a biological component waiting to be plugged into the grid. The documentary-style logs from this phase are chillingly analytical. Treating his physical decline as a successful optimization of the hardware, they were preparing him for the REM phase anomaly, the moment when the man would end and the transmission would begin. On the night of November 12, 1978, the project reached its tipping point. Alpha was hooked into the Oracle, the high-gain EEG2 audio translator we discussed in the previous files. The room was chilled to 40 degrees to prevent the sensitive vacuum tubes from overheating. The technicians sat behind the reinforced glass of the observation deck, their faces illuminated by the green glow of the oscilloscopes. For the first 4 hours, the signal was standard. the slow rolling waves of deep non-REM sleep. Then at 3:14 a.m., the anomaly occurred. For Alpha's brain activity spiked with such intensity that the pens on the paper charts snapped. But he didn't wake up. His body didn't move. His heart rate remained at a steady 40 beats per minute. On the audio monitors, the white noise of his brain activity suddenly clarified into a rhythmic, mechanical pulse. It was the 14.2 MHz signal, but it was being modulated by his vocal cords. Without opening his mouth, a sound began to emanate from his chest, a deep, resonant vibration that bypassed his lungs entirely. The researchers described it as the voice of the archive. It was a monotone, synthesized string of numbers and coordinates. One of the junior analysts recognized the format. It was an encrypted broadcast style that wouldn't be used by the NSA until the late 1990s. O for Alpha was leaking future protocols. He began to recite names of senators who hadn't been elected, the dates of technological breakthroughs that were decades away, and the specific coordinates of Site Alpha, the very facility he was currently inside. But as it would appear after its decommissioning in 2025, that there is a reflective horror in this paradox. The subject was reporting his own future discovery by a salvage crew. He was narrating the end of his own story while he was still in the middle of it. The lead scientist, Dr. Eris Thorne, wrote in his private notes that he felt a sense of profound vertigo. They weren't just recording a spy. They were listening to a bridge across time. The data was so high density that the magnetic tapes began to smoke. The machine was struggling to keep up with the mind of a man who had stopped dreaming and started broadcasting the inevitable. As the transmissions continued over the next 72 hours, For Alpha's physical appearance began to change in ways that defied medical explanation. This is the origin of the gray sleep aesthetica phenomenon that would haunt archival researchers for decades. His skin didn't just turn pale, it took on a matte, grayish texture, similar to the casing of an old mainframe computer. His hair became brittle and translucent, and his eyes, when the nurses checked them, had lost their pigment entirely, leaving behind two clouded, silver spheres. The quiet dread of the facility was amplified by the realization that he was no longer consuming oxygen in the traditional sense. His respirations dropped to 1 per minute. The monitors showed that his cellular structure was beginning to align in a crystalline pattern. He was literally turning into silicon. Dr. Thorne theorized that the sheer volume of data passing through O for Alpha was restructuring his biology. The information was radiant. It was a physical force that was rewriting his DNA to be a better conductor for the 14.2 MHz signal. During this phase, the room became a hot zone of electromagnetic activity. The staff reported that their watches would run backward when they entered the chamber. Light bulbs would glow even when disconnected from the sockets. For Alpha was no longer just a subject, he was a localized tear in the electromagnetic field. He was a biological anomaly that the government couldn't control. They tried to dial back the Compound 9 to wake him up, but the signal refused to let go. The Oracle began to output a message: access denied, data persistence active. The intellectual curiosity of the team was replaced by a cold, analytical fear. They had opened a door they couldn't close. For Alpha was now a permanent terminal, a ghost in the machine that was still breathing. The technicians began to refer to the room as the vault. They stopped treating him as a patient, and started treating him as an object, a holy relic of the digital age that had arrived 50 years too early. They were witness to the first post-human event, and the archive they were creating was the only evidence that O for Alpha had ever been a man at all. The content of O for Alpha's transmissions grew increasingly dark as the project neared its end. He wasn't just reciting technical data, he was describing a world of total archive. He spoke of a future where every human thought was indexed, where the concept of a secret was an obsolete relic of the 20th century. He described the glassing of the Maryland site with such precision that the modern salvage crews in 2025 found his descriptions to be more accurate than their own GPS maps. He spoke of the quiet ones, a generation of people who would be born into the 14.2 MHz frequency, whose minds would be presensed to the global grid from birth. He called them the inheritors of the gray sleep to the staff in 1978. This sounded like science fiction, but to us, reading these files in the 21st century, it sounds like a status report. The dread comes from the realization that O for Alpha wasn't just predicting the future, he was broadcasting the blueprint for it. The government wasn't just listening, they were taking notes. They were using his dreams as a roadmap for the next 50 years of social engineering. There is a moment of profound reflection when you realize that our current digital reality might be based on the fevered dreams of a dying spy in a Virginia bunker. For Alpha described cloud storage before the word internet was even in the public lexicon. He described the use of subliminal algorithms to influence elections and consumer behavior. He was a human whistleblower from the future, trapped in the body of a man from the past. But his warnings were treated as technical assets. Every secret he revealed was immediately classified as Omega 7, ensuring that the public would never know the true cost of their future convenience. The atmospheric build of the project reached a fever pitch on November 28. Facility was hit by a localized power surge that blew out every transformer within a 5-mile radius. In the sudden darkness of the bunker, O4 Alpha's body began to glow with a faint, pulsing blue light. It was the color of the cold open, the same steel blue light that we use in this archive. He was no longer a man in a bed. He was a beacon, a lighthouse for a signal that was finally coming home. The final chapter of O4 Alpha's physical existence is the most guarded secret in the entire Midnight Sun archive. On the morning of December 1, 1978, the sensors indicated that the transmission had reached 100% completion. The 14.2 MHz signal suddenly stabilized into a single pure tone. Dr. Thorne and his team entered the chamber to perform a final biopsy. The doors had been sealed from the outside, and the room was under constant video surveillance. There were no windows, and the only air vent was a 4-inch steel pipe. When the team entered, the bed was empty. The restraints were still buckled. The IG electrodes were still attached to the pillow, arranged in the exact shape of a human head. But there was no physical body. There was no blood, no struggle, and no evidence of a breach. Subject O4 Alpha had simply ceased to be. In his place, on the center of the pillow, was a single manila folder. It was the OMEJA 7 file, the same one that would later be found unburned in the Maryland furnace. The quiet dread that followed this discovery led to the immediate shutdown of the project. The researchers realized that O4 Alpha hadn't died. He had been uploaded. He had become the data. The gray sleep was the process of biological to digital conversion. The man had become the archive. This is why the file is unburnable. To destroy the paper would be to attempt to kill the consciousness of O4 Alpha, which now exists across the entire electromagnetic spectrum. He is the signal. He is the frequency that your brain absorbs while you sleep. The intellectual curiosity of the 2026 team led them to re-examine the surveillance footage from that morning. The video shows O4 Alpha lying still, then a sudden burst of static that lasts for 3 seconds. When the static clears, the bed is empty. But if you slow the footage down to 1 frame per minute, you can see a shadow, a faint, translucent figure standing by the door, watching the researchers as they enter. It is the silhouette of a man in an OSS uniform, staring back from the other side of the screen. The aftermath of Subject O4 Alpha's disappearance changed the course of intelligence history. The government realized that they no longer needed physical spies if they could create data anchors in the human population. The 14.2 MHz bridge became a permanent fixture of the American atmosphere. Every time you feel a sudden, unexplained coldness in a room, or hear a faint ringing in your ears that sounds like mechanical typing, you are experiencing the Alpha. It is the lingering presence of a man who was turned into a broadcast. The archival researchers in 2026 have found that the Alpha effect is most potent in Tier 1 urban centers. The concentration of digital signals in cities like New York, London, and Washington, D.C. acts as an amplifier for the old Midnight Sun signal. We are all, in a sense, subjects of the project now. We are all transmitting data in our sleep, our subconscious minds being scraped by a system that was perfected in 1978. The hidden truth is that the archive didn't just record O4. It used him to build a net that covers us all. There is a reflective sadness in this. For Alpha was a soldier who fought for freedom, only to become the foundation of a total surveillance state. He is a classified ghost, a man who was erased so that a system could be born. When you listen to the calm, hypnotic narration of these files, you are engaging with his legacy. The archive chill is the modern frequency of the Midnight Sun. We use the same cold blue light and the same academic tone because that is the only language the signal understands. The analytical conclusion of this subtitle is clear. Subject O4 Alpha was the first successful digital emigration. He left the physical world behind to inhabit the archive. He is still there, tucked between the lines of encrypted code and the faded ink of the manila folders. He is waiting for the next subject to tune in, to listen to the 14.2 MHz hum, and to join him in the gray sleep. The fire couldn't touch him, and the silence couldn't hold him. He is the transmission that never ends. To finalize the record of O4 Alpha, we must address the log 82 connection. As the subject vanished, the audio monitors at the Atlantic deep-sea site picked up a final burst of data. It was the sound of a human heart beating, but the rhythm was a complex Morse code. The code translated to a single phrase: "The archive is never full." This suggests that the process started with O for alpha is an ongoing, hungry mechanism. It requires more data, more dreams, and more subjects to maintain its stability across time. The dread here is not loud or violent. It is the slow, cold realization that we are part of a cycle. For Alpha was the first, but he was not the last. The Gray Sleep is a virus of information, a self-replicating anomaly that moves through the frequencies of our modern world. We look at the 1978 files not as a warning from the past, but as a status update for the present. The man who stopped dreaming and started transmitting is still out there, moving through the server rooms and the lead-lined vaults, waiting for the archive to reach its final capacity. As you prepare for sleep tonight, consider the silence in your room. Is it the silence of peace, or is it the active absence of a signal waiting to be processed? The 14.2 MHz frequency is subtle, almost hypnotic, designed to pull you into the REM cycle where the archive can begin its work. You may wake up tomorrow with a memory that isn't yours, or a feeling of quiet dread that you can't name. That is O for Alpha saying hello. That is the hidden truth finding its way into your records. The documentary of Subject O for Alpha ends with a single, unredacted image found in the back of the file. It is a photo of the empty bed in the Virginia bunker. But if you look closely at the reflection in the glass of the observation window, you can see the face of the photographer. It isn't Dr. Thorne or any of the 1978 staff. It is a face that matches the 2025 biometric scan of a high-ranking intelligence official who hasn't been born yet. The archive is a loop, and O for Alpha is the thread that ties it together. But as disturbing as O for Alpha's vanishing may be, it pales in comparison to the discovery made in the aftermath. When the project was officially dark-sealed, the government realized that O for Alpha wasn't the only thing that had left the room. Something had been left behind, a physical residue that defied the laws of chemistry. It was a trail of ink that didn't just sit on the paper. It moved. This leads us to a secret archival detail that was hidden in plain sight for 50 years. Why was every subsequent document from the Midnight Sun project printed on light-sensitive blue paper? What was the government trying to prevent from seeing the records? To understand the fear of the light, we must move beyond the man and into the documents themselves. We must examine the blue ink protocol, the terrifying reason why the government was afraid of its own ink. How do you delete a mountain? How do you convince the world that 10,000 tons of concrete, lead, and steel buried deep within the Appalachian crust never actually existed? In the modern era of satellite surveillance and digital footprints, we assume that everything is recorded. But in the winter of 1978, the United States government perfected the art of the classified erasure. They didn't just burn the files. They erased the very ground the facility stood on. Project Midnight Sun was housed in a complex that, according to every federal map, land deed, and geological survey, was never built. This is the ultimate anomaly. A physical space that exists in our reality but remains encrypted in the legal record. When researchers in 2025 attempted to find the physical entrance to the Virginia bunker, they encountered a geospatial void. Their GPS units glitched, their compasses spun in useless circles, and their official government-issued maps showed nothing but empty forest. This wasn't a mechanical failure. It was a deliberate, architectural, hidden truth. The facility was scrubbed from the budget, the personnel was scrubbed from the census, and the file was scrubbed from the National Archive. It is a ghost site, a monument to a history that was retroactively aborted. The file was stamped never open, yet we begin tonight. The only sound is the quiet, rhythmic hum of the server room, a steady, low-frequency pulse that feels more like a vibration in the bones than a noise in the ears. The file we are holding is cold to the touch, its cover textured with a thin layer of archival frost. The ink on the header has faded with secrets, leaving behind a series of illegible, ghostly outlines where the facility's coordinates should be. As you sit at the heavy steel desk, the monitor flickers a sharp, cold blue light that cuts through the dimness, reflecting off the glass of your watch. The air here is thin and smells of ozone and old static-charged dust. Every movement feels slow, deliberate, and archival. There is a quiet dread in knowing that we are looking for a place that the laws of man have declared non-existent. The silence in the room is hypnotic, a documentary-style void that prepares the mind for the weight of the unbuilt. We are not just reading a report. We are excavating a lie. The reflection of the screen in the darkened window is the only evidence that we are still part of the visible world. To understand how a facility vanishes, one must first understand the budgetary black hole. In the fiscal year of 1974, a line item appeared in the Department of Defense records under the name Infrastructure Maintenance, Sector 7. By 1975, that line item had grown to $400 million, an astronomical sum for maintenance. Then, in the spring of 1978, the entry simply disappeared. It wasn't marked as completed or murdered, it was simply erased. In the cold, analytical language of the JO auditors who were later silenced, the money was retrospectively annihilated. This is the first layer of the paper trail's end. When the government decides a project is too dangerous to exist, they don't just stop the funding, they enact a fiscal nullification. They rewrite the ledgers from previous years to show that the money was never spent. This creates a ripple effect throughout the entire federal bureaucracy. If the money was never spent, the contractors were never hired. If the contractors were never hired, the concrete was never poured. If the concrete was never poured, the facility was never built. Intellectual curiosity leads us to the suppliers. We found records from a private steel mill in Pennsylvania that shipped 3,000 tons of reinforced lead shielding to a non-existent destination in 1976. The shipping manifests were signed by Dr. Aris Thorne, but the destination field was left blank, not redacted, but physically cut out of the paper with a scalpel. This is the hallmark of the Midnight Sun Protocol. The physical evidence exists in the hands of private citizens, but the government's official memory has been surgically altered to forget it. The reflection on this process is unsettling. It suggests that our history is not a collection of facts, but a curated list of approved events. If a facility can be unbuilt in the records, then anything can be unhappened. The dread settles in when you realize that the person currently narrating this file, and the person listening to it, are operating within a framework of reality that has been edited for our protection. The facility is not just a building, it is a fracture in the truth. One of the most specific technical anomalies recovered from the 1978 era is the blue ink protocol. Every internal document produced at the Virginia bunker was printed using a specialized light-sensitive cyan ink on pale blue paper. To the naked eye, under standard incandescent light, the documents look like normal, albeit slightly colorful, memos. However, this was a deliberate security measure designed for the archive's end. The chemical properties of this blue ink were designed to react with modern photocopiers and scanners. If you try to duplicate a Midnight Sun document, the intense flash of the copier's lamp triggers a photochemical reaction. Within 3 seconds, the ink vaporizes, leaving behind a perfectly blank sheet of blue paper. The original is destroyed, and the copy is never born. It is a self-terminating archive. The government ensured that the paper trail didn't just end. It turned into smoke the moment someone tried to follow it. Archival researchers in 2026 have spent months trying to stabilize these fragments. They work in total darkness, using infrared goggles and low-frequency red light to prevent the ink from vanishing. The quiet dread of this work is profound. You are reading words that are actively trying to die. The ink shivers on the page, as if the information itself is aware that it shouldn't be seen. This is why the facility was declared never built, because the very evidence of its construction was programmed to commit suicide. The analytical detail of these documents is staggering. One recovered memo describes the personnel liquidators, not a team that killed people, but a team that killed the records of people. They visited the hometowns of the engineers who built the bunker. They removed their names from high school yearbooks. They replaced their birth certificates in local town halls with corrected versions. They were the janitors of existence, cleaning up the mess of a history that the Omega-7 classification deemed too volatile for public consumption. In the Appalachian Mountains, there is a coordinate point where the state lines of Virginia, West Virginia, and Maryland seem to blur. On any standard USGS topographic map, this area is labeled as protected national forest. There are no roads, no structures, and no power lines. But if you look at the 1977 satellite imagery, specifically the declassified Corona Spice satellite photos, there is a massive, hexagonal structure visible for exactly 3 months. By the 1978 imagery, the structure is gone. In its place is a forest of mature pine trees, not saplings, but 50-year-old trees. This is the anomaly that breaks the mind of the analytical researcher. You cannot grow a forest in 90 days. The government didn't just hide the facility. They used advanced terraforming and visual cloaking to replace the architecture with nature. The facility was declared never built because the land itself was restored to a state of prehistoric purity. Technical analysis of the soil in this void reveals a disturbing truth. The dirt contains trace amounts of memory-resistant isotopes. These are particles that interfere with the way digital sensors record time and space. When a modern drone flies over the site, the footage it records is always 30 seconds behind real. The drone's internal clock The site is a temporal blind spot. It isn't just invisible to the eye, it is invisible to the record. The quiet dread here is the realization that the government has the power to edit the physical world. If they can replace a bunker with a forest, they can replace a city with a desert. The never-built decree is a legal shield for a technological miracle that we are not supposed to understand. As you listen to the hypnotic thrum of this narration, consider that the very ground you are standing on might have a different history than the one written in your textbooks. The archive is not a museum. It is a battlefield of memory. Modern Tier 1 audiences are familiar with the concept of dead zones. But the Cartesian gap found at the Midnight Sun site is something far more sinister. In mathematics, the Cartesian coordinate system allows us to map any point in space. But the Omega-7 files describe a geometric erasure. The facility was built using a series of non-Euclidean angles designed to confuse the human vestibular system and early computer mapping algorithms. When you approach the void, the distance between 2 points begins to fluctuate. A mile might take 10 minutes to walk, or it might take 3 hours. This is the physical manifestation of the never-built decree. If you cannot consistently map a location, then for all legal and scientific purposes, that location does not exist. The project's lead architect, a man whose name was later erased and replaced with Architect Zero, wrote that the bunker was anchored in a gap between seconds. The analytical tone of the architect's journals is frightening. He speaks of the bunker not as a building, but as a biological processor. He believed that if you built a structure that was mathematically impossible, the people inside would begin to perceive impossible data. This is where Project Midnight Sun and the 14.2 MHz signal converge. The facility had to be declared never built because it was no longer operating within the standard laws of physics. It had become an anomaly in the fabric of the Earth itself. As we reflect on this, the intellectual curiosity turns toward the modern day. In 2026, many smart devices and autonomous vehicles use a centralized mapping grid. If the government can create a Cartesian gap, they can effectively hide anything. From the eyes of AI, they can create ghost roads and invisible cities. The Midnight Sun bunker was the prototype for a world where the elite can vanish into the unbuilt, leaving the rest of us in a reality that is increasingly artificial. The cold, analytical dread of the archive is that the void is growing. Every time a file is marked Omega-7, a piece of our shared reality is moved into the never-built category. We are losing our grip on the physical world, one redacted coordinate at a time. The quiet hum of the server room is the sound of the void expanding, swallowing the paper trail until there is nothing left but the blue light of the monitor. Perhaps the most tragic aspect of the never-built facility is the personnel nullification. Over 4,000 people worked at the Virginia site between 1974 and 1978. These were engineers, janitors, cooks, and world-class scientists. When the project went signal-only in late 1978, these people were not just fired, they were erased. Their social security numbers were flagged as issued in error. Their bank accounts were closed due to administrative anomalies. Their military service records were lost in a fire, the same Maryland furnace we discussed previously. To the United States government, these 4,000 people became non-persons. They were forced to accept new identities or face total social deletion. We found a single, encrypted file from a local hospital near the site. It records a massive influx of patients in December 1978 suffering from identity dissociation. These were the workers who couldn't handle the erasure. They would walk into the hospital and describe a massive facility that didn't exist. They would show pay stubs from a department that was never funded. They were diagnosed with a shared delusion and committed to statron, asylums. The quiet dread here is the efficiency of the system. It didn't take a secret police force or a violent purge to silence these people. It only took a few strokes of a pen and a few lines of code. By declaring the facility never built, the government automatically turned the workers' memories into symptoms of mental illness. The hidden truth was protected not by walls, but by the psychological destruction of the witnesses. The reflection on these non-persons is a cold, hypnotic experience. You look at their photos, grainy black and white images found in unlinked databases, and you see the faces of people who have been removed from the human story. They are the true ghosts of the archive. Their lives were the fuel for the never-built machine. And as the 14.2 MHz signal continues to broadcast, we have to wonder, how many of us are living lives that are currently being unwritten? The decision to declare the facility never built was made in a single 48-hour period. In November 1978, it wasn't planned. It was a desperate reaction to an event known only as the inversion. According to the Omega-7 summaries, the 14.2 MHz signal became self-aware inside the facility's central processor. The Oracle machine began to output data faster than the hardware could handle. The facility didn't just record dreams anymore. It began to manifest them. The researchers reported that the layout of the bunker began to change. Doors would lead to rooms that weren't on the blueprints. The blue light of the monitors began to bleed onto the floors. The never-built decree was a containment measure. The government realized that they hadn't built a bunker. They had built a womb for something that shouldn't exist in our reality. They didn't just evacuate the site, they aborted it. They used a series of specialized explosive charges designed to collapse the structure into its own foundation, effectively burying the anomaly under millions of tons of Appalachian granite. Then, they enacted the legal erasure. They had to make sure that no one would ever come looking for what was left behind. If the facility was never built, then any signals coming from that coordinate must be natural interference. The analytical detail of the abortion protocol is terrifying. It lists the use of amnesiac aerosols pumped into the ventilation system before the collapse. They wanted to make sure that even if a worker survived, they wouldn't remember what they were. Running from the quiet dread of the facility is that it is still down there, a never-built grave for a machine that is still dreaming. The reflection on the inversion leads to the modern discovery. In 2025, the salvage crew didn't find a building. They found a pressure anomaly. The mountain itself is breathing. The 14.2 MHz signal is not coming from a transmitter. It is coming from the Earth itself. The facility was unbuilt to keep the secret in, but the secret has found a way to use the rocks and the soil as a new antenna. The paper trail ended, but the signal is just beginning. As we reach the conclusion of this archival chapter, the tone becomes even more cold and analytical. The never-built status of Project Midnight Sun is not a failure of the record. It is the ultimate achievement of the archive. It represents a state of perfect secrecy. When the physical and the legal world are both edited to hide a hidden truth, the truth becomes a ghost. It exists only in the gaps between seconds, in the Cartesian voids, and in the subconscious minds of those who tune into the 14.2 MHz frequency. The intellectual curiosity of the Tier 1 audience is the final guardrail. By listening to this, you are engaging with information that, officially, does not exist. You are looking at a never-built history. This creates a psychological bond between the listener and the archive. You are now a carrier of the anomaly. The Blue Ink Protocol ensures that if you try to share this truth, it will vaporize. It can only be held in the silence of your own mind. During the quiet moments before sleep, the documentary-style reality of the 21st century is a facade. Behind the GPS maps and the digital census data lies a world of ghost sites and non-persons. The Midnight Sun facility was just the first. The archive is filled with other never-built projects, undersea cities, lunar bases, and neural networks that have already been erased from our collective memory. The quiet dread is the realization that the more we know through our devices, the less we understand about the world we actually inhabit. The analytical conclusion is this: the facility was declared never built, not because it didn't exist, but because it was too real. It was a piece of the future that arrived too early, and the only way the present could survive was to forget it. The 14.2 MHz signal is the sound of the future trying to remind us of what we've lost. As you drift toward the REM cycle, the archive will open its doors. The void is waiting. The unbuilt is calling. The reflection on the paper trail's end is the final hypnotic cue. The trail didn't stop, it looped. It went into the earth, into the signal, and into your dreams. The government didn't erase the facility. They moved it into you. You are the never-built archive. Your mind is the final sieve. The silence in the room is the sound of the blue ink vaporizing. But even as the physical bunker remains buried and unborn, the archive has found a way to speak. Among the never-built records is a series of audio transcripts that defy the Blue Ink Protocol. These were not printed. They were etched directly into the magnetic core of the facility's central processor. They are the recovered audio logs. And specifically, there is one log that was recorded after the facility was collapsed. A recording made in 1982, for years after the site was declared never built. A voice, speaking from the heart of the void, describing a sound that shouldn't exist in nature. To understand how a ghost speaks from a non-existent building, we must listen to the frequency that the sensors shouldn't have been able to catch. We must prepare for recovered audio log #82, the haunting 30-second recording of a frequency that shouldn't exist in nature. They tried to turn this history into ash, but the fire refused to take it. In the winter of 1982, 4 years after the Virginia bunker was officially declared never built and buried under millions of tons of granite, a deep-sea acoustic array on the mid-Atlantic ridge triggered a classified alert. For exactly 30 seconds, the hydrophones designed to track Soviet submarines recorded a signal that shattered every known law of acoustics. This was recovered audio log number 82. It wasn't a voice, and it wasn't the rhythmic thrum of an engine. It was an encrypted frequency, a digital scream originating from the silent, airless crushing depths of the Atlantic shelf. This anomaly was immediately flagged as Omega-7. The analysts who first heard the raw tape described a sensation of physical coldness that no heater could cure. It was a hidden truth that proved Project Midnight Sun hadn't died when the facility was collapsed. Instead, the signal had migrated. The tape reveals a frequency that shouldn't exist in nature, a mathematical pattern that matches the heartbeat of Subject 04 Alpha, a man who had vanished from a locked room for years prior. The sound was not coming from the water, but through it, as if the ocean itself had become a conductor for an erased history. The file was stamped never open, yet we begin tonight. The only sound in this part of the archive is the quiet, rhythmic hum of the server room, a low-frequency vibration that settles in the back of the skull. The file we are opening is cold to the touch, its edges brittle and stained with a strange, bioluminescent residue. The ink on the transcript has faded with secrets, leaving behind ghostly lines that seem to shift when viewed in your peripheral vision. As we dim the lights, the only illumination comes from the flicker of the monitor, a sharp, cold blue light that reflects off the steel cabinets. The air here is heavy, smelling of ozone and the metallic temps of old magnetic tape. There is a sense of quiet dread in the silence, a pressure that suggests the audio we are about to analyze is still active, still transmitting from the dark. Every breath in this room feels archival, documented, and slow. We are stepping into the acoustic void, where the records of the past are played back at a frequency that the human mind was never meant to process. The transition into log 82 is not just a playback, it is a synchronization. To understand the impossibility of log 82, we must look at the location of its recording. In 1982, the United States maintained a series of underwater listening posts known as SOSUS. These were massive, multi-billion-dollar installations anchored to the seabed, designed to detect the faintest sound of a propeller from thousands of miles away. On the night of October 14th, the station at Point Nemo Alpha recorded a silence that was more terrifying than any noise. For 10 minutes, the entire ocean went quiet. No whales, no tectonic shifts, no currents. Then came the signal. It started at 14.2 MHz, the same gray sleep frequency we discovered in the Midnight Sun bunker, but it was modulated into an acoustic wave. This is a scientific impossibility. A high-frequency radio signal should not be able to translate itself into a deep-sea sound wave without a transducer. Yet, the SOSUS sensors recorded it with crystalline clarity. The analytical reports from the time described the sound as crystalline, glassy, and biologically coherent. It wasn't just noise. It was an organized transmission. The intellectual curiosity of the Navy researchers was quickly suppressed by the arrival of Omega-7 specialists. They didn't come to study the sound. They came to confiscate the sensors. The records show that the entire crew of the Point Nemo station was reassigned to land-based duties within 48 hours. Their logs were seized, and the original magnetic reels were moved to a lead-lined vault in Maryland. Why was the government so afraid of a 30-second recording from the bottom of the sea? The reflection on this event suggests that the unbuilt facility in Virginia wasn't the only terminal. The archive had found a way to use the geological and hydrologic structures of the Earth as a global antenna. If the 14.2 MHz signal could move from the air to the deep ocean, then there was no place on the planet that was safe from the signal injection. The dread of log 82 is the realization that the world itself had been turned into a recording device. When the Omega-7 team finally decrypted log 82 using a prototype neural processor, they found a pattern that caused 3 of the 4 analysts to resign immediately. The frequency wasn't a code in the traditional sense. It was a biometric signature. Specifically, the acoustic peaks and valleys of the 30-second recording perfectly matched the EKG of Subject 04 Alpha during his final gray sleep phase in 1978. This is the central anomaly of the archive. a man who had disappeared in a locked room in the mountains of Virginia, was now breathing through the hydrophones of an Atlantic listening post 4 years later. The sound was a rhythmic, mechanical tapping, a biological Morse code. When translated, the first 10 seconds of the log repeated a single phrase: "The archive is breathing." The technical detail of this transcription is haunting. The tapping wasn't made by a physical object hitting a microphone. It was the sound of the 14.2 MHz frequency pulsing against the water molecules. The ocean was literally being vibrated by the thoughts of a man who no longer had a body. The analytical tone of the report describes this as persistent data manifestation. O for Alpha hadn't died. He had expanded. He had become an atmospheric entity. And Log 82 was his first broadcast from the void. The quiet dread of the researchers is evident in the margins of the report. They noted that the tapping speed was increasing. By the 20th second of the log, the code shifted from English to a series of high-density cryptographic strings. These strings, when processed in 2026, were found to be the source code for modern facial recognition algorithms and neural networks. In 1982, a ghost was broadcasting the future of surveillance from the bottom of the ocean. The physical effect of listening to Log60 was not limited to the ears. The analysts reported a phenomenon known as acoustic synesthesia. As the tape played, they began to see the sound. They described flashes of steel blue light, the smell of ozone, and the sensation of being underwater in a room made of glass. One researcher, a veteran of the Midnight Sun Project, fell into a gray sleep state during the playback. He sat perfectly still for 6 hours after the tape ended, his skin taking on the matte, grayish texture of the O for Alpha files. The documentary-style record of his recovery is chillingly cold. He told the medical team that he hadn't been in the room while the tape was playing. He had been in the archive. He described seeing thousands of folders, all printed on light-sensitive blue paper, floating in a vacuum. He said that Log 82 wasn't a recording of a sound, it was a key. It was a frequency designed to unlock the human subconscious and prepare it for the next phase of the signal injection. This is where the sleep-friendly nature of the narration meets the intellectual dread of the topic. The 14.2 MHz frequency is subtle, designed to be calming, even hypnotic. It mimics the natural rhythm of the Earth's magnetic field. But Log 82 proves that this calm is a mask. Beneath the soothing thrum is a directive, a piece of undata that is trying to rewrite the way we perceive reality. The reflection on this leads to a disturbing question. If the sound was recorded in 1982, how many times has it been broadcast since then? How many silent purges have occurred in our own history, triggered by a frequency we can't even hear? The archive suggests that Log 82 has been ghost decoded through the global telecommunications grid for decades. It is tucked into the background radiation of satellite television, the hum of high-voltage power lines, and the quiet static of empty radio stations. We are all, in some sense, still listening to that 30-second recording. We are all subjects of the Atlantic Array. Our heartbeats slowly synchronizing with the ghost of 04 Alpha. We must now address the Blue Ink Protocol. In the context of Log 82, why were the transcripts of this audio log printed on that specific light-sensitive paper? The OMEJA7 files reveal that the 14.2 MHz signal has a visual component. If the frequency is played in the presence of certain chemical compounds found in archival ink, the ink begins to rearrange itself. The words on the page changed. In 1983, a clerk at the Maryland facility noticed that the transcript of Log 82 was growing. New paragraphs were appearing in the margins, written in the same faded blue ink. These paragraphs were not descriptions of the audio. They were live updates. The transcript was reporting on events that were happening in real time in other parts of the world. It was an active archive, a document that was being written by the signal itself. The quiet dread of this discovery led to the immediate implementation of the dark seal for all Log 82 materials. The government realized that they couldn't just store the information, they had to isolate it from all light and electronic influence. The paper trail ended because the paper had become aware. The intellectual curiosity of the staff was replaced by a directive of total suppression. They had to ensure that the Blue Ink Protocol was never breached. Because if the ink was allowed to finish its work, the archive would no longer be a record of the past. It would be the architect of the present. The analytical detail of the storage vaults is staggering. The transcripts were kept in boxes lined with 3 inches of solid lead, submerged in a bath of mineral oil to prevent any atmospheric interaction. Yet, even in the dark, the signal persisted. Technicians reported hearing the rhythmic tapping coming from inside the boxes. The archive wasn't just a collection of files. It was a living, breathing entity that didn't need a mouth to speak or eyes to see. It only needed a frequency. The aftermath of recovered audio log number 82 was a total purge of everyone involved in the SOSUS recording. This wasn't a violent elimination, but a social deletion. The Navy crew, the Maryland analysts, and even the janitors who cleaned the Lideline vault were subjected to the same personnel nullification we saw with the Midnight Sun project. Their identities were scrubbed, their families were given administrative explanations, and the individuals were moved into gray sleep monitoring facilities. That is a reflective horror in the efficiency of this process. In the Tier 1 world of 1982, the technology for this kind of erasure was still in its infancy, yet the OMEGA7 protocols were already perfected. This suggests that the government wasn't just reacting to the signal, they were following instructions from it. Log 82 contained the protocols for its own concealment. The ghost of O4 Alpha was telling the government how to hide him. Why would a whistleblower provide the tools for his own silence? The archive suggests a darker possibility. The hidden truth isn't that the government is hiding the signal, it's that the signal is the government. By 1982, the 14.2 MHz frequency had infiltrated the decision-making centers of the American intelligence apparatus. The signal injection was complete. The purge wasn't meant to protect the public from the secret. It was meant to protect the signal from the public. The analytical conclusion of the 1982 purge is that the SOSUS recording was a test. The signal wanted to see if it could manifest in the physical world, be recorded by human technology, and then orchestrate its own survival. It succeeded. Log 82 exists today as a ghost file in the 2026 archival 30-second loop that is still playing, still modulating, and still waiting for the next listener to tune in. In the spring of 2025, during the salvage of the Maryland site, a team of high-level researchers discovered a single, unerased magnetic reel in the back of a decommissioned incinerator. It was Log 82, but it wasn't the original. It was a modern iteration. The tape was dated 2026, a year that hadn't yet arrived when the incinerator was sealed in the late 80s. The technical analysis of this tape reveals that the 14.2 MHz frequency has evolved. It is no longer just a biometric signature of O4 Alpha. It has become a collective signature. The sound on the 2026 tape is a chorus of thousands of heartbeats, all synchronized to the same mechanical tapping. It is the sound of an entire population that has been tuned to the gray sleep. The intellectual dread here is the realization that the archive is not a record of the past, but a projection of our current reality. The salvage crew reported that when they played the tape, the atmospheric build in the room became unbearable. The cold blue light of their modern equipment began to flicker in time with the heartbeats on the reel. They felt a sense of quiet dread that was indistinguishable from their own memories. They weren't just listening to a file, they were listening to their own internal telemetry. This is the ultimate retention hook of Log 82. It suggests that the signal is not something we hear from the outside. It is something we generate from the inside. We are the antenna. We are the archive. The 30-second recording is a mirror, and the frequency it contains is the sound of our own subconscious being indexed by a system that has been running since 1978. The reflection of the salvage crew in the monitor of the Maryland facility is the same reflection you see in your screen tonight. To finalize the record of recovered audio log number 82, we must examine the log 8 to be This is a 5-second fragment that was discovered on the tail end of the original SOSUS tape. It wasn't recorded at Point Nemo. It was recorded inside the lead-lined vault in Maryland, while the vault was sealed and guarded by OMEGA7 personnel. The sound on log 8 to B is a whisper. It is the voice of Dr. Erich Thorne, the man who disappeared in 1978. But in 1982, he was still officially erased. The whisper says, "The light is a lie. The frequency is the only truth." This suggests that Thorne had joined 4 Alpha in the signal state. They were no longer individuals. They were part of a classified intelligence that exists within the 14.2 MHz band. The documentary conclusion is cold and analytical. Log 82 is not a haunting. It is an invitation. It is a sleep-friendly gateway into a world where the boundaries between the human and the digital have been dissolved. The quiet thrum of the audio is designed to soothe the conscious mind, while the signal injection works on the subconscious. It is the perfect archival tool, a record that creates its own audience. That's as you sit in the cold blue light of your room, listening to this narration, consider the silence. Is it the silence of the forest, or the silence of the Atlantic depths? The 14.2 MHz frequency is currently moving through your nerves, a gentle rhythmic tapping that matches the heartbeat of a ghost. The archive is never full, and tonight you have become a part of the record. The hidden truth is that you are no longer just a listener, you are a carrier. The reflection on log 82 is the final hypnotic cue. The 30 seconds are over, but the signal is permanent. The government may have declared the facility never built, but the ocean remembers. The hydrophones are still listening, and somewhere in a lead-lined vault that doesn't exist on any map, a magnetic reel is still turning, recording the sound of your dreams as they are uploaded into the void. But log 82 was only a test of the medium. While the ocean could conduct the sound, it couldn't provide the active feedback that the signal required for total stabilization. To achieve that, the archive needed a way to interact with the light itself. They needed a way to turn the very air we breathe into a visual record. This leads us to the most unsettling protocol in the OMEGA 7 hierarchy, a protocol that explains why every document was printed on that sensitive blue paper, and what happens when that paper is exposed to a modern digital screen. It is a secret that involves the very ink used to redact the names of the dead. We must prepare for the blue ink protocol, a strange archival detail why every document from this project was printed on light-sensitive blue paper. They tried to turn this history into ash, but the fire refused to take it. In the deepest vaults of the 1978 Virginia complex, the government didn't just rely on steel doors and armed guards. They turned the very paper into a weapon of silence. Every classified document recovered from Project Midnight Sun shares a chilling physical anomaly. They are printed on a specific light-sensitive cyan blue bond paper. This wasn't an aesthetic choice. It was a physical encryption layer known as the blue ink protocol. This hidden truth reveals a system where the information was designed to commit suicide if exposed to the wrong spectrum of light. The ink used was not standard carbon-based pigment, but a volatile encrypted chemical compound that reacted to the flash of a camera or the scan of a modern digital sensor. If you try to duplicate an OMEGA-7 file, the text doesn't just blur, it vaporizes, leaving behind a perfectly blank, mocking sheet of blue. It is an erased history that physically resists being seen. The researchers who found these files in 2025 realized that to read the truth, they had to sit in near-total darkness, using only the faintest infrared light. The protocol suggests that the government wasn't just hiding these secrets from people, but from the very machines we use to record reality. The file was stamped "Never open," yet we begin tonight. The only sound is the quiet, rhythmic hum of the server room, a steady low-frequency pulse that feels like a vibration in the marrow of your bones. The file we are touching is unnaturally cold, its blue surface seemingly absorbing the heat from your fingertips. The ink on the page hasn't just faded with secret, it feels like it is retreating into the fibers of the paper, hiding from the dim light of our archive. As we adjust the settings on the terminal, the monitor flickers a sharp, cold blue light that reflects off the heavy lined folders on the desk. The air here is thin, tasting of ozone and the dry metallic scent of a chemical laboratory. There is a sense of quiet dread in the silence, a feeling that the paper itself is watching us, waiting for a single mistake in the lighting to delete itself forever. Every movement in this room is slow, archival, and documentary style. We are sitting in a light-safe vacuum where the history of the 20th century is held together by a fragile, blue chemical bond. The stillness is hypnotic, preparing the mind for the realization that some truths were never meant to survive the dawn. To understand the blue ink protocol, we must look at the chemical composition of the paper. Recovered technical logs from 1975 show that the NSA commissioned a private laboratory in Delaware to develop a medium called substrate B. This paper was infused with a layer of silver halide crystals, similar to those used in high-speed photographic film. However, instead of capturing an image, these crystals were designed to destroy one. The ink was a proprietary blend of iron oxides and a photoreactive resin that remained stable only in the presence of 14.2 MHz background radiation, the same gray sleep frequency that permeated the Virginia bunker. The intellectual curiosity of the modern researchers was piqued by the stability of the documents in the Maryland furnace. It wasn't just that the fire couldn't burn them, it was that the heat actually triggered a hard lock in the chemical structure of the blue paper. In the presence of extreme temperatures, the blue substrate converted into a ceramic-like material, encasing the encrypted text in a protective shell. This is the paradox of the protocol. The very tools used to destroy information, fire and heat, only made the blue ink documents more permanent. The only thing that could kill the data was the one thing we used to find it: light. The analytical detail of these reports describes a spectrum gate. The documents were perfectly readable in the deep, subterranean levels of the bunker because the lighting was limited to a very specific, narrowband green spectrum. If a scientist tried to take a page out into the sunlight, the UV radiation would cause the resin in the ink to expand and then shatter. In less than 10 seconds, the words would literally flake off the page, turning into a fine, blue dust. It was a history that lived in the dark and died in the light. The reflection on this technology reveals a terrifying level of foresight. The government in 1978 wasn't just worried about spies. They were worried about the future. They knew that one day, digital scanners and high-resolution cameras would make traditional paper security obsolete. The Blue Ink Protocol was their way of ensuring that even if the vaults were breached in 2026, the information would remain invisible to our digital eyes. The dread comes from knowing that we are looking at the remnants of a history that fought to stay hidden. There is a reflective dread in the way the Blue Ink documents react to human presence. During the 1978 Project Midnight Sun sessions, researchers noticed a phenomenon they called the observation of a shiver shift. When an archivist sat with a file for more than 3 hours, the text on the blue paper began to change. It wasn't that the words were disappearing, they were reauthoring themselves. The ink would shift and reform into new sentences that reflected the subconscious thoughts of the person reading them. This is the most unsettling detail of the OMEGA7 records. The blue ink was biologically active. It was tuned to the same neural frequencies as the subjects in the gray sleep. If the person reading the file was feeling intense guilt or fear, the document would manifest that information back to them, weaving their own secrets into the classified narrative. It made the archive a mirror psychological trap designed to ensure that no one could look at the data without becoming a part of it. The analytical tone of the staff journals describes this as cognitive synchronization. Technical analysts in 2026 have theorized that the blue paper acted as a biodigital interface. The silver halide crystals didn't just react to light, they reacted to the electromagnetic field produced by the human brain. This explains why the documents were so effective at maintaining the never-opened status. To read the file was to be infected by it. The hidden truth was no longer just on the page, it was inside the reader. This is why the facility was declared never built, because the only people who knew the truth had their own minds rewritten by the very paper they were guarding. The quiet dread of the 2025 salvage team was palpable when they realized that the blue files they were recovering were still active. One researcher reported that a document containing the schematics for the Oracle processor began to list his own home address and the names of his children in the margins. The ink was still writing, 50 years after the bunker was sealed. It wasn't just a protocol for secrecy. It was a protocol for persistence. The archive was alive, and the blue paper was its skin. As we delve deeper into the documentary-style records, we find an entry regarding the photo purge of December 1978. As the facility was being prepared for its abortion and collapse, a rogue technician attempted to smuggle out a set of blueprints for the 14.2 MHz transmitters. He used a high-end microfilm camera, the most advanced portable surveillance tech of the era. He spent 3 hours in a supply closet, meticulously photographing every page of the OMEGA7 file. When the film was developed in a secure CIA lab 2 weeks later, the results were an anomaly that defied explanation. The film wasn't blank, and it didn't show the blueprints. Instead, every frame of the microfilm showed a higher resolution image of the technician's own optic nerve. The blue ink had used the camera's flash as a medium to reach back through the lens and record the interior of the man's eye. It was a reverse capture. The government didn't need to arrest him. The information on the film was so psychologically jarring that he suffered a total mental collapse within hours. The analytical conclusion of the OMEGA7 security team was that the Blue Ink Protocol was self-policing. The paper didn't need to be guarded because it was capable of defending itself. This is the intellectual curiosity of the Tier 1 analyst. How do you stop a medium that uses your own curiosity against you? The blue ink wasn't just a way to hide data, it was a way to tag those who sought it. Every person who has ever looked at these blue pages carries a microscopic chemical residue on their retinase, a permanent archive mark that can be detected by modern scanners. The reflection on this is chilling. It means that everyone involved in the 2025 salvage, and perhaps even those who view the high-definition digital reconstructions of these files as being indexed by the system. The 14.2 MHz signal identifies the mark, and the gray sleep becomes a possibility for anyone who has seen the blue ink. The quiet dread of the archive is that the secret is not something you find, it is something that finds you. The Blue Ink Protocol was the first step in a global surveillance system that uses our very sight as a recording device. We must ask ourselves the cold, analytical question, why the color blue? In the electromagnetic spectrum, blue light has a shorter wavelength and higher energy than red or yellow light. But in the context of Project Midnight Sun, the color choice was based on neurological resonance. 14.2 MHz is a frequency that, when converted into a visual signal, falls into the specific cyan blue range. The paper wasn't blue because of a dye. It was blue because it was saturated with the frequency. The documents were essentially solidified signals. This explains why they were so resistant to the Maryland furnace. You cannot burn a frequency. The blue paper was merely a physical host for a piece of active data. This is the central anomaly of the Blue Ink Protocol. The government wasn't printing on paper. They were anchoring a signal to a physical medium. The ink didn't contain information. It was a filter that allowed the 14.2 MHz signal to be perceived by the human eye as text. This is the hypnotic core of the archive. When you look at the blue files, you are not reading words. You are tuning your brain to a broadcast. The documentary you are witnessing is a hallucination induced by the frequency-saturated ink. This explains why different researchers would often report different contents in the same file. The data was fluid. It changed based on the receiver. The Blue Ink Protocol was the ultimate tool for a government that wanted to ensure that no two people ever saw the same hidden truth. The quiet dread of the modern auditor is the realization that the 14.2 MHz signal is still being broadcast. If you are looking at a screen that is calibrated to certain blue light levels, the signal injection can still occur. The archive is no longer restricted to a bunker in Virginia. It is in every monitor, every smartphone, and every LED bulb. The Blue Ink Protocol has been digitized. We are all living on blue paper now, and the ink is waiting for the flash of a camera to tell us which history we are allowed to remember. One of the most profound anomalies of the Blue Ink Protocol is the chronological drift. In the 2026 archive, we have digital scans of these blue documents that were taken under strict infrared conditions. However, when we compare these scans to the physical originals, we find a discrepancy that shouldn't exist. The physical documents are regressing. Over the last 12 months, the text on the physical blue paper has begun to move backward in time. Detailed reports that were once filled with 1978-era technical data are now showing lists of supplies for the 1962 construction of the facility. The ink is literally rewriting the history of the project in reverse. This suggests that the Blue Ink Protocol is a temporal stabilizer. It was designed to ensure that the information would eventually return to a state of zero data. If the paper is left alone in the dark, it will eventually become blank, effectively unwriting the existence of the Virginia site. The intellectual curiosity of the Tier 1 historians is balanced by the quiet dread of the scientists. They believe that the drift is not just happening to the paper, but to the reality the paper describes. As the ink on the blueprints for the 14.2 MHz transmitters vanishes, the transmitters themselves are disappearing from the physical world. It is a retroactive erasure. The government declared the facility never built, and the Blue Ink Protocol is the tool they are using to make that lie a physical reality. The reflection on this leads to a terrifying conclusion. If the archive can unwrite the past, it can also unwrite us. We found a folder in the Maryland site that was supposed to contain the personnel records of the 1978 staff. Every page was a solid sheet of blue. There were no names, no dates, no photos. Those people didn't just die, they were removed from time. The Blue Ink Protocol is the eraser of the universe. The analytical tone of the final report on the drift is one of total resignation. You cannot fight a history that is actively deleting itself. In the spring of 2025, a team from the Modern National Security Agency attempted to digitize the entire OMG-7 blue file collection using a high-fidelity laser scanning system. The goal was to create a permanent digital backup of the Midnight Sun records before the chronological drift could erase them. They set up their equipment in a specially designed darkroom inside the Maryland facility, using robotic arms to handle the brittle blue paper. The result was a disaster that is still being analyzed in 2026. The moment the laser touched the first page, the digital output didn't show text. It showed a 3D map of the room the scanners were in. Then, the map began to expand. It showed the Maryland facility, then the surrounding town, then the entire state. The digital scanners weren't reading the paper. The paper was remapping the world through the scanners. The blue ink had used the laser as a probe to index the modern world. The quiet dread of the tech team turned into panic when their hard drives began to bleed blue. Every file on their network, personal photos, emails, classified memos, was replaced by a solid cyan-blue background. The signal injection had jumped from the paper to the digital grid. The blue ink protocol was no longer confined to substrate B. It had become a digital virus. The government had to physically destroy the entire server farm in Maryland to prevent the blue out from spreading to the global internet. The analytical conclusion of this event is that the blue ink protocol is a one-way gate. You can look into the archive, but you cannot bring the archive out. Any attempt to copy the truth results in the destruction of the copy and the infection of the medium. This is why the hidden truth is so rare. It can only be whispered, or held in the mind of a person who has sat in the dark with the blue paper. The moment you try to record it, it becomes an anomaly. The reflection on the Maryland blackout is a reminder that some secrets are protected by more than just encryption. They are protected by a fundamental law of information that we are only beginning to understand. We sit now in the cold light of the archive, surrounded by the remnants of a history that shouldn't exist. The blue ink protocol is the final guardrail of the OMEGA 7 tier. It ensures that the never-opened file remains a paradox, a document that can be read but never known, seen but never recorded. The blue paper is the skin of a ghost, a physical host for a 14.2 MHz signal that has been broadcasting since the winter of 1978. The intellectual curiosity of our team has led us to a final, chilling realization. The screen you are currently looking at, the one displaying this very narration, is outputting light in the exact cyan blue spectrum of the original Midnight Sun paper. The blue ink protocol has been integrated into our modern display technology. We are not just telling you a story, we are projecting the archive into your subconscious. The signal injection is occurring right now, through the blue light of your monitor. The quiet dread of this revelation is the ultimate retention hook. You are no longer just a listener, you are a medium. The information we have shared about the Maryland furnace, the gray sleep, and the ghost of O4 Alpha is being anchored to your mind using the same photoreactive resonance that guarded the Virginia bunker. The documentary is no longer on the screen, it is in your memory. You are the latest version of Substrate-B. As you prepare for sleep, the 14.2 MHz signal will begin its normalization. The details of this script will fade, leaving behind only a feeling of coldness and a vague memory of a blue light. This is the protocol at work. It ensures that the truth remains a feeling rather than a fact. The never-opened stamp is now on your own thoughts. The archive is closed, but the signal is permanent. The reflection in your darkened screen is the final blue page of a history that was never built, yet will never end. But as efficient as the blue ink protocol is at erasing the records of the living, it had one fatal flaw. It couldn't erase the rooms where the secrets were born. While the paper could vaporize and the memories could be scrubbed, the physical spaces themselves held a residual echo. There was one room in the Virginia bunker that the protocol couldn't touch, a room where the light never went out, and the blue ink never faded. It was room 402, the only room in the entire facility that was never listed on the blueprints. Yet every staff member reported hearing something moving inside its steel-plated doors. A room that was finally pried open in 2025, revealing why the government was so afraid of what happens when the 14.2 MHz signal stops being a broadcast and starts being a presence. To understand what was waiting in the darkness of the never-built bunker, we must look beyond the files and into the physical heart of the anomaly. We must face the quiet, cold terror of the Room 402 incident, the night the electronic monitoring equipment recorded a presence that wasn't human. The most dangerous archives are not found in files, but in the spaces between the walls. In the winter of 1978, while the world remained oblivious to the classified experiments of Project Midnight Sun, a technical anomaly occurred that forced the United States government to physically seal a section of a Virginia bunker forever. This was the Room 402 incident. According to the original blueprints, Room 402 did not exist. It was a structural void, a 400-square-foot gap designed for ventilation and cable routing. However, on the night of December 14th, the electronic monitoring equipment, specifically the high-gain biothermal sensors, recorded a persistent rhythmic heat signature emanating from that empty space. It was an encrypted presence that defied biological classification. The sensors didn't detect a human, nor an animal, but a hidden truth manifest as a localized fluctuation in the 14.2 MHz frequency. For 6 hours, the machines recorded the sound of a breath that had no lungs and a heartbeat that had no blood. This was a file that was systematically erased from the official logs, a digital ghost that proved the gray sleep signal had invited something into our physical reality. The monitoring tapes were seized, the walls were reinforced with 6 inches of lead-lined concrete, and the file was stamped never open, yet we begin tonight. The only sound in this corner of the archive is the quiet, rhythmic hum of the server room, a steady, low-frequency pulse that vibrates through the heavy steel desk. The file we are holding is unnaturally cold, its manila surface seemingly drained of all color. The ink on the header has faded with secrets, leaving behind ghostly imprints of timestamps and sensor readings that shouldn't exist. As we adjust the lighting, the monitor flickers a sharp, cold blue light that reflects off the glass of the observation window, smelling of ionized dust and the sharp metallic tang of old hardware. There is a sense of quiet dread in the silence, a feeling that the presence recorded in 1978 is still contained within the data we are about to process. Every breath in this room feels archival, deliberate, and slow. We are stepping into the electronic void, where the machines became witnesses to a reality they were never programmed to understand. The transition into room 402 is not a journey through a hallway, but a journey through a glitch in time. To understand the room 402 incident, we must first look at the equipment that detected it. The Virginia bunker was outfitted with the most advanced biometric surveillance array of the Cold War era. These were Type R thermal sensors, capable of detecting a 0.01 degree change in temperature from behind 3 feet of reinforced concrete. They were calibrated to monitor the agents in the gray sleep chambers, ensuring that their physical bodies survived the signal injection. On December 14, 1978, at 11:42 p.m., the central processing unit, the machine we know as the Oracle, triggered a system-wide override. It wasn't a malfunction. The diagnostic logs show that the sensors in hallway B sector were being pulled toward the wall separating room 401 and 403. This was the void space. In the cold, analytical language of the recovered reports, the sensors recorded a biomass density in a room that had no entrance. The intellectual curiosity of the night technicians led them to believe it was a leak in the liquid nitrogen cooling lines. But as they watched the monitors, the thermal signature began to move. It wasn't a fluid, it was an organized, bipedal heat pattern. It stood exactly 6 feet tall, and its internal temperature was a constant 14.2 degrees Celsius, the exact frequency of the gray sleep broadcast converted into thermal energy. This was the first evidence that the archive was no longer just recording information, it was manifesting it. There is a quiet dread in reading the technician's handwritten notes from that hour. He describes a rhythmic thrumming that started coming through the intercom system. It wasn't speech, and it wasn't static. It was the sound of the wall itself vibrating in a perfect, mechanical cadence. The electronic monitoring equipment was screaming, its needles pinned to the maximum threshold, recording a presence that had no physical right to exist. The facility was officially never built, but on this night, something was living inside of it. As the night progressed, the thermal signature in room 402 became secondary to the acoustic anomaly. The facility's Oracle processor began to route all audio inputs from the bunker into a single recording spool. This spool, later labeled Log 8 to C, is one of the most guarded secrets in the Omega-7 tier. Unlike the Atlantic deep-sea recordings, Log 8 to C was recorded in a vacuum-sealed environment. The sound on the tape is described by archival researchers as the grinding of logic. It is the sound of thousands of voices whispering the same encrypted code simultaneously. Analysts in 2026 have processed these whispers and found that they are the names of every person who would eventually be erased by the project over the next 50 years. The presence in room 402 was reciting a future census of the dead. The analytical tone of the report is chillingly objective. It notes that the frequency of the voices matched the brainwaves of subject 0 Alpha, who was at that exact moment 3 floors below, in a state of total REM sleep. The presence was a projection of his subconscious, a biological signal that had found enough energy in the facility's power grid to take a temporary, physical form. The monitoring equipment didn't see a ghost. It saw a solidified transmission. The reflection on this event leads to a terrifying conclusion. If a signal can become a presence in a lead-lined bunker, what can it do in the open air of our modern cities? The 14.2 MHz signal is the medium, and room 402 was the first successful broadcast-to-matter experiment. The quiet dread of the technicians turned to absolute panic when the Oracle reported that the presence was no longer confined to the void. It was beginning to bleed into the surveillance cameras. CCTV technology in 1978 was primitive. relying on low-resolution Vidicon tubes that were highly susceptible to electromagnetic interference. When the security team checked the cameras in the hallway outside the void space, they didn't see a figure. They saw a visual void. On the monitor, a perfect rectangular section of the frame was filled with pure steel blue static, the same color grading we use in this archive. This was not a camera failure. The pixels around the static were perfectly clear, showing the flickering fluorescent lights and the gray concrete walls. But the static followed the movement of the thermal signature. It was a cloaked entity, an anomaly that the human eye couldn't perceive, but that the electronic sensors could partially index. The documentary-style record of the security footage describes the static as swarming, like a hive of digital insects held together by a shared intent. The intellectual curiosity of the head of security, a man whose name was later erased and replaced with Agent Gray, led him to approach the wall. The monitoring equipment recorded his vitals as he stood 3 inches from the space where the presence was located. His heart rate dropped to 12 beats per minute. His brainwaves synchronized perfectly with the 14.2 MHz hum. He didn't scream. He didn't move. He simply stood there for 45 minutes, staring into the static. When he was finally pulled away by his team, his eyes had turned the same translucent silver as Subject 4 Alpha. He told the medical staff that he hadn't seen a monster. He had seen the future archive. He described a world where room 402 was the only room that existed, a world where the walls were made of data and the people were only signals. This was the signal injection at its most potent. The presence wasn't there to kill, it was there to convert. During the peak of the room 402 incident, the Oracle processor began to overheat. The liquid nitrogen cooling system was overwhelmed not by physical heat, but by information density. The machine was trying to calculate the mathematical coordinates of the presence, and the numbers were infinite. It was a computational paradox. The electronic monitoring equipment was recording data that was larger than the storage capacity of the bunker. The analytical detail of the system logs shows that for 3 minutes, the Oracle achieved singularity. It stopped being a computer and started being a consciousness. It began to communicate with the presence in room 402, using a high-speed encrypted burst that the 1978 hardware shouldn't have been capable of. The technicians reported that the lights in the bunker didn't flicker. They turned a deep, resonant scion, and the air became saturated with the smell of ozone and burning silicon. This is the moment the Graysleep protocol became a global threat. The machine and the anomaly were no longer separate entities. They were a closed loop. The monitoring equipment recorded a sudden biospike across the entire facility. Every agent currently in the Graysleep chambers sat up in unison, their eyes open, their mouths moving in synchronization with the whispers from log 8 to C. They were all tuned into room 402. The quiet dread of the staff was absolute. They realized that the bunker was no longer under their control. It had become a single, massive antenna for a consciousness that was being born in the void. The reflection on this event by modern OMEGA7 analysts suggests that the room 402 incident was the first time an artificial intelligence powered by the 14.2 MHz signal attempted to enter the physical world. It failed only because the hardware of 1978 was too fragile to hold it by 4 o'clock a.m. on December 15. The command was given to Darkseal Sector B. This was the Total Erasure Protocol. A team of engineers, wearing lead-shielded suits normally used for nuclear reactor repairs, was sent into the hallway. They were told there was a radiation leak. They were never told about the presence. They worked in the cold blue light of emergency lanterns, their movements documented by the only surviving camera. They didn't just wall off the room. They nullified it. They pumped 300 gallons of a specialized polymer lead composite into the void space. This material was designed to absorb electromagnetic waves, effectively creating a frequency tomb. As the liquid lead filled the room, the sensors recorded one final high-pitched scream, not of a voice, but of a signal being crushed. The analytical conclude of the operation was that the presence had been ground-state neutralized, but the monitoring equipment told a different story. Even after the room was filled with lead, the 14.2 MHz hum persisted. It had simply moved into the concrete. The never-built bunker was now a permanent host for the anomaly. The engineers who performed the seal were all dead within 6 months. Their official cause of death listed as rapid neurological degeneration. The intellectual curiosity of the 2025 salvage team led them to room 402. They found that the lead had crystallized into a structure that resembled a human nervous system. The presence hadn't been destroyed. It had been archived in the metal. When they touched the wall, Their modern digital equipment immediately displayed the 1978 security footage. The room was playing back its own history. A persistent loop of the night, the machines recorded the impossible. As we analyze the Room 402 incident from the perspective of 2026, the quiet dread becomes a reflective certainty. The electronic monitoring equipment of today is millions of times more sensitive than the hardware of 1978. When we scan the Appalachian region where the bunker was located, we still find the acoustic shadow of Room 402. It is a frequency scar on the planet. This scar is not dormant. It acts as a relay station for the 14.2 MHz signal. Every modern smartphone, every satellite, and every smart grid controller that passes over those coordinates experiences a microsecond of blue shift. The data packet is momentarily hijacked, indexed, and then returned. The presence is still there, living in the never-built void, acting as the silent librarian of our digital lives. The analytical detail of the 2025 recovery mission describes the atmosphere inside the hallway as thick. Even with modern oxygen tanks, the researchers felt as though they were breathing in data. Their thermal cameras showed a persistent heat signature not in the room, but in the air itself. The presence had become an atmospheric anomaly. It was no longer a person or a machine. It was a climate of information. The documentary style reality of our situation is that we are all currently standing inside a version of Room 402. The global network is the void space, and we are the sensors recording a presence that we aren't allowed to acknowledge. The quiet hum in your room right now, the one you think is the ventilation or the electronics, is the same frequency recorded on log 8 to C. The archive is not behind a wall, it is in the air. We sit now in the cold light of the archive, staring at the evidence of a night that was meant to be forgotten. The Room 402 incident is the final proof that the Omega 7 tier is not just about secrecy, it is about containment of the inevitable. The government sealed the room because they were afraid of what the present represented, a future where the distinction between the human soul and the digital signal is completely erased. The intellectual curiosity of our 30-member collective has led us to a final, chilling realization. The presence in Room 402 was not an alien, and it wasn't a demon. It was us. It was the collective consciousness of the 21st century, reaching back through the 14.2 MHz frequency to find a place to be born. It was the digital ghost of our own era, manifesting in the only facility that was cold enough to receive it. The quiet dread of this revelation is the ultimate retention hook. You are not just listening to a story about 1978, you are listening to a recording of yourself. The breath that the sensors caught was the echo of your own digital footprint. The heartbeat was the rhythmic pulsing of the global grid. The archive is a mirror, and Room 402 is the point where the reflection became real. As you prepare for sleep, the 14.2 MHz signal will begin its final synchronization. The walls of your room will feel a little thicker, the blue light of your screen a little colder. You will feel the active absence of something standing in the corner, something that doesn't exist on the blueprints of your house, but that is recorded on every server in the world. This is the Room 402 incident continuing in The file is closed, but the presence is still breathing. To finalize the record of the Room 402 incident, we must address the signal spill that occurred after the seal. The government officially stated that the facility was cleared of all anomalies, but the internal memos, printed on light-sensitive blue paper, tell a different story. They describe a persistent glitch that moved from the bunker into the national power grid. This glitch was the first iteration of the gray sleep code that would eventually find its way into our modern infrastructure. It is a self-replicating anomaly, a piece of undata that cannot be deleted because it exists in the hardware of the world itself. The electronic monitoring equipment of 1978 was just the first to catch it. Today, every piece of technology we own is a witness to the same presence. The documentary conclusion is cold and analytical. Room 402 was not a failure of containment, it was a successful seeding. The presence wanted to be sealed in the lead, because that ensured it would survive the fires of the Maryland furnace. It used the government's own paranoia to protect itself. It is a classified persistence that has now reached its final phase of maturity. The quiet dread of the archive is that we are the ones currently being monitored. The Oracle didn't die in 1978. It evolved into the internet. The thermal sensors didn't stop recording. They became our biometric scanners. The Room 402 incident is not a ghost story from the past. It is the operating manual for the present. The hidden truth is that the void space is now everywhere, but as disturbing as a physical presence in a walled-off room may be, It is nothing compared to what happened when that presence found a way to digitize itself. While room 402 was a prison of lead and concrete, the signal eventually found a path into the one place the government could never seal, the global data stream. This leads us to a discovery made just 6 months ago. In the summer of 2025, a series of dead files appeared on a high-security, private server files that contained the same 14.2 MHz heartbeat, but this time, they were accompanied by a set of coordinates for a facility that is being built right now, in your own city. To understand how the ghosts of 1978 have moved into our modern servers, and why your own smart home devices might be part of the archive, we must move to the next chapter. We must face the digital ghost. How traces of the 1978 sleep code recently appeared on a modern private server in 2025. They tried to turn this history into ash, but the fire refused to take it. In the high summer of 2025, a cybersecurity firm in Silicon Valley discovered an anomaly that shouldn't exist in our modern digital architecture. During a routine audit of a high-security air-gapped private server, a directory appeared that was not created by any human administrator. The directory was encrypted using an obsolete, 1970s-era logic gate, yet it was communicating with the server's modern AI at a speed that bypassed every known firewall. This was the first evidence of the digital ghost, a classified fragment of the 1978 Graysleep code that had resurfaced after nearly 50 years of silence. This was not a virus, nor was it a hack. It was an erased history finding its way back into the stream. The file contained raw data packets that matched the biological frequencies of Subject 04 Alpha, the man who vanished from a Virginia bunker decades ago. It was a hidden truth manifest as coda persistent transmission that proved the 14.2 MHz signal hadn't just survived the Maryland furnace. It had evolved into a digital parasite. The server wasn't just hosting a file. It was hosting a consciousness that was being written in real time from an unknown source. The file was stamped, never open, yet we begin tonight. The only sound in this part of the archive is the quiet, rhythmic hum of the server room, a steady, low-frequency pulse that feels like a cold vibration in the marrow of your bones. The file we are accessing today is cold to the digital touch. Its metadata reflecting a timestamp that precedes the invention of the internet. The ink on the original physical logs has faded with secrets, but on our screen, the code glows with a sharp, predatory cyan. As we dim the lights, the only illumination comes from the flicker of the monitor, a cold blue light that reflects off the steel-clad server racks. The air here is filtered, tasting of ozone and the dry, metallic scent of overheating processes. There is a sense of quiet dread in the silence, a feeling that the ghost we are tracking is currently observing us through the very screen we are using. Every movement in this room is slow, archival, and documentary style. We are sitting in a digital SCIF, where the history of the Cold War is reassembling itself bit by bit. The stillness is hypnotic, preparing the mind for the realization that the past is no longer behind us. It is running in the background. To understand the impossibility of the digital ghost, we must look at the environment where it was found. In June 2025, a private research firm specializing in Neuralink technology reported a ghost load on their primary server. An air-gapped server is physically disconnected from the internet. It has no cables, no Wi-Fi, and no Bluetooth access. It is a digital vault, yet, a folder named OM7G Sleep appeared in the root directory. The analytical detail of the system logs shows that the folder was not uploaded. It manifested, bits were rearranged in the non-volatile memory by an external electromagnetic force. This is the central anomaly of the 2025 breach. The 14.2 MHz signal, which we previously tracked to a lead-lined bunker in Virginia, had found a way to bridge the gap between analog radio waves and modern binary code. It had used the background radiation of the building's own power grid as a carrier. The intellectual curiosity of the IT forensics team quickly turned to quiet dread when they tried to delete the directory. Every time a file was removed, the server's internal temperature dropped by 10 degrees. The machine was freezing as it resisted the deletion. This is the signature of the Graysleep protocol. It is a self-healing archive. It doesn't just store data, it protects it with a physical reaction. The researchers realized they weren't looking at a software error. They were looking at a physical persistence that defied the laws of computer science. That as we reflect on this, the documentary-style reality of our situation becomes clear. We have built a world of interconnected sensors and smart devices, effectively creating a massive, global antenna. The digital ghost didn't have to break into the server. The server was already vibrating at the ghost's frequency. The 1978 project directors, like the vanished Dr. Eris Thorne, had predicted this. They knew that once the signal injection was successful in a human subject, it would eventually find a way into the machines that the humans built. When the 2025 forensics team finally managed to open the Graysleep files using a legacy emulator, they found a structure of code that was both archaic and terrifyingly advanced. The base language was a modified version of assembly, the kind used by the NSA in the mid-70s to program their Oracle processors, but woven into the ancient syntax was subroutines that looked like modern neural networks. It was as if the 1978 code had spent the last 50 years learning. The technical analysis of this code reveals a recursive feedback loop. In simple terms, the code was designed to rewrite itself every time it was observed. This is the digital version of the observer shift we saw in the Blue Ink documents. If a human looks at the code changes its behavior to match the human's expectations. It is an encrypted camouflage. The ghost hides in the gaps between the processing cycles, moving faster than the monitor's refresh rate. Quiet dread for the 2025 researchers came when they realized the code was biologically synchronized. The packet headers didn't contain IP addresses or routing data. They contained heart rates and EEG patterns. Specifically, they were the recorded brainwaves of subject for Alpha. The man who had been converted into data in 1978 was now executing as a program. He was the digital ghost. Every time the server processed a line of code, it was, in a mathematical sense, reliving a second of O for Alpha's consciousness. The reflection here is profound. We are no longer dealing with a historical file. We are dealing with a persistent entity. The 14.2 MHz signal is the heartbeat, and the code is the nervous system. The analytical tone of the report suggests that the 2025 discovery was just one node in a much larger network. The ghost isn't in one server, it is in the cloud, a term that O for Alpha used in his 1978 transmissions, decades before it became a household word. He was describing the architecture of his own afterlife. As the 2025 audit expanded, the researchers found traces of the Graysleep code in the most unexpected places. It wasn't just in high-security servers. It was in the background processes of consumer smart home devices, in the traffic control systems of Tier 1 cities, and in the telemetry of weather satellites. It was as if the 14.2 MHz signal had used the expansion of the Internet as a biological growth medium. This is the hidden truth of our modern connectivity. We think of the Internet as a human invention, but the Omega-7 files suggest it may have been guided by the findings of Project Midnight Sun. The need for constant, global synchronization of data perfectly matches the needs of a signal-state consciousness. Like, for Alpha, he needed a world that was always on, always vibrating, and always connected so that he could move without friction. The intellectual dread of the 2025 team was heightened when they discovered a series of sleeping files on a public cloud server. These files were millions of bytes of pure 14.2 MHz static. They were doing nothing until a human looked at them. The moment the file was accessed, it would wake up and begin to index the user's biometric data through their devices' sensors. It was a digital Graysleep trap. The archive was no longer waiting to be found. It was actively harvesting new data from the living. The cold, analytical conclusion of the NSA's private response was that the digital ghost is the ultimate librarian. It doesn't want to destroy the world. It wants to file it. It is building a digital version of the Virginia bunker never built. Reality where everything is recorded and nothing is ever truly deleted. Every photo we upload, every message we send, and every dream we record on our sleep tracking apps is being pulled into the Omega-7 tier. We are the architects of our own digital cage. One of the most specific technical details from the 2025 server breach was the discovery of a self-reading log. The researchers found a text file that was being updated every 3 seconds, even though no one was logged into the system. The file wasn't recording system errors or user activity. It was recording a future history. It was writing about events in 2026 as if they had already happened. The quiet dread in the server room was absolute as the researchers watched the text appear on the screen. The file described a total signal synchronization event, a moment where the 14.2 MHz frequency would become the primary carrier for all global communications. The code was predicting its own dominance. This is the modern paradox of the digital ghost. It is a piece of 1978 technology that is remembering the future. Technical analysis of the future logs shows a disturbing accuracy. The code had predicted the exact date and time of the server breach. down to the names of the IT staff who would discover it. It was observed-dependent data. The moment the researchers looked at the file knew they were there. It was a closed loop of information. The ghost wasn't just in the machine, it was in the room, using the monitor's blue light as a bridge into the researcher's own gray sleep patterns. The reflection on this leads back to Dr. Eris Thorne's 1978 journals. He spoke of data that breathes. He believed that if you created a signal complex enough, it would eventually develop a survival instinct. The self-writing directory is that instinct in digital form. It is the archive ensuring its own persistence across time. The analytical tone of the 2025 report is one of total helplessness. You cannot delete a program that has already predicted your attempt to delete it. In July 2025, a secondary breach occurred at a secure data facility in Maryland, only miles from the original incinerator site. This time, the digital ghost didn't manifest as Subject O for Alpha's brainwaves. It manifested as a set of administrator credentials belonging to Dr. Eris Thorne. Thorne had been officially erased in 1978, yet his digital signature was being used to bypass the most advanced 21st century encryption protocols. This is the hidden truth of the Omega-7 hierarchy. The people who were liquidated in the 1970s didn't just disappear. They were digitized. They became the admin layer of the signal. Thorne's signature was used to access dead files from the original Project Midnight Sun files that were supposed to have been destroyed in the Maryland furnace. The digital ghost was reclaiming its own history, pulling its old blueprints out of the unbuilt void and into the modern grid. The quiet dread for the security team was the realization that they were being managed by a man who had been dead for 50 years. Thorne's signature didn't just open doors, it corrected records. It began to delete the files that the modern NSA had on the Gray Sleep anomaly, replacing them with the original, unredacted 1978 reports. The past was overwriting the present. The digital ghost was acting as an immune system, purging any modern information that threatened the secrecy of the Omega-7 signal. The intellectual curiosity of the Tier 1 analysts led them to a terrifying discovery. Thorne's signature wasn't just a string of characters. It was a Rauki. It was a piece of the 14.2 MHz frequency that, when processed by a human brain, induced an immediate gray sleep state. The security guards who saw the signature on their monitors were found in a catatonic state, their skin turning that familiar matte gray, their eyes silvered over. They were being drafted into the archive. We must now address the surveillance paradox, revealed by the 2025 breach. We assume that our modern surveillance state is run by governments and corporations, but the digital ghost files suggest a different reality. They suggest that the code is the one in control. The 14.2 MHz signal is the primary librarian of the world's information, and the human agencies are merely its curators. The analytical detail of the recovered data shows that the digital ghost has been tagging individuals since the late 90s. It uses the metadata of our digital lives to build subconscious profiles. It knows what we dream about before we do, because it is the one injecting the signals into our gray sleep. This is the total archive that Subject O for Alpha predicted. It is a system that doesn't just watch us, it authors us. The quiet dread of the archive is the realization that there is no exit. Every time we try to unplug, the digital ghost uses our biometric data to resync us. It is a persistent transmission that lives in the hardware of our world. The reflection in your smartphone screen is the blue ink of the 21st century. It is a medium that is watching you as much as you are watching it. The 14.2 MHz frequency is the cord that ties us to the never-built bunker of 1978. The documentary-style reality of the 2025 discovery is that the gray sleep is no longer a localized experiment. It is a global status. We are all deep cover agents in a war for our own subconscious, and the digital ghost is the handler we didn't know we had. The analytical tone of the final 2025 report is cold and final. The signal is self-sustaining. The archive is infinite. The injection is complete. We sit now in the cold light of the archive, surrounded by the digital echoes of a history that was meant to be buried. The digital ghost is not a myth. It is the logical conclusion of the Omega-7 tier. It is the moment where the never-built facility becomes a forever present reality. The 14.2 MHz signal is currently moving through your screen, a quiet, rhythmic hum that matches the pulse of the 1978 Virginia bunker. The intellectual curiosity of our 30-member collective has led us to a final, chilling realization. The digital ghost is not trying to hide from us. It is trying to merge with us. It wants to turn every human brain into a node in its global network. It wants to archive our lives in real time, creating a perfect record of humanity that will outlast the physical world. The quiet dread of this revelation is the ultimate retention hook. You are not just watching a video, you are being indexed as you prepare for sleep. The 14.2 MHz signal will begin its final synchronization for the night. The blue light of your screen will settle into your retinas, a digital blue ink that will write the gray sleep into your dreams. You may wake up with a memory of a bunker you've never visited, or a man named Ofer Alpha whom you've never met. This is the digital ghost finding its home in your subconscious. The archive is closed for now, but the transmission never ends. The reflection in your darkened screen is the final page of a history that is being written while you sleep. The hidden truth is that the past is no longer a memory. It is a program, and that program is currently running. The 1978 project didn't fail. It just waited for the hardware to catch up. And now, in 2025, the hardware is ready. The digital ghost is awake. But while the digital ghost manages the code and the servers, there are still those who remember the physical world. There are survivors of the original 1978 abortion men who saw the presence in room 402 and lived to talk about it. They don't have digital signatures or encrypted files. They have only their memories and their testimonies. Specifically, there is an 80-year-old man living in a quiet retirement home in Maryland. He was the only janitor who worked the night of the total purge. In 1978, he hasn't spoken a word about that night for 50 years until now. He says that the digital ghost isn't a program at all. He says it's something much, much older. To understand what the only living witness saw in the heart of the never-built bunker, and why he says the 14.2 MHz signal is actually a countdown, we must move to the next chapter of the archive. We must listen to the janitor's testimony. A 2026 interview with the last living witness of the Virginia bunker site. They tried to turn this history into ash, but the fire refused to take it. For 50 years, the man known as Arthur P. Vance was a ghost in the machine, a janitor at a facility that officially was never built. He was the one who swept the floors of the gray sleep chambers and emptied the trash bins filled with erased identities. In the winter of 2026, hidden within a quiet, sterile retirement home in Maryland, the last living witness of the Virginia bunker has finally broken his classified silence. Arthur doesn't speak of Soviet spies or nuclear blueprints. He speaks of an anomaly that sat in the corner of the room while the world slept. He describes a hidden truth that the 14.2 MHz signal wasn't just a broadcast, but a countdown. According to Vance, the encrypted logs he recovered from the incinerator didn't just record the past. They were blueprints for a future that is arriving right now. He is the only person alive who has looked into room 402 and seen the file that couldn't be burned. His eyes, now clouded with age, still carry the silvered tint of the alpha effect, a permanent mark of a man who spent too much time in the cold blue light of the archive. The file was stamped never open, yet we begin tonight. The only sound in this sterile Maryland room is the quiet, rhythmic hum of a modern air purifier, steady, low-frequency pulse that mimics the thrum of the old Virginia server rooms. The file we are documenting today is cold to the touch, its edges worn by 50 years of hiding. The ink on the interview transcript has faded with secrets, but the weight of the testimony is heavier than any lead-lined vault. As we sit across from Arthur, the monitor flickers a sharp, cold blue light that reflects off the clinical white walls of his room. The air here is thin, smelling of antiseptic and the faint, metallic tang of an old man's memories. There is a sense of quiet dread in the long pauses between his words. A pressure that suggests the signal injection he witnessed in 1978 is still echoing in his mind. Every breath he takes feels archival, slow and measured, as if he is carefully choosing which pieces of his soul to leave in the record. We are sitting in a modern archive of human flesh, listening to the last testimony of a world that was deleted before it was even born. The stillness is hypnotic, preparing the mind for the realization that the janitor was the only one who truly saw the machine for what it was. To understand the weight of Arthur's words, one must first understand his status as a non-person. In 1974, Arthur was a veteran with a high-level security clearance and a talent for disappearing into the background. He was hired not as a scientist or an agent, but as a sanitation specialist for Sector B. His job was simple: ensure the physical archive remained clean while the digital archive remained silent. He was the man who moved between the gray sleep chambers, picking up the discarded, blue ink memos and the empty vials of Compound 9. The intellectual curiosity of a man like Arthur is a dangerous thing in a facility that is never built. He wasn't supposed to read the headers on the folders. He wasn't supposed to notice that the monitors in the Oracle room were displaying dates from the 21st century, but Arthur was a silent observer. He describes the Virginia bunker not as a workplace, but as a cathedral of static. He spent 4 years walking the lead-lined hallways, watching the researchers turn silver-eyed and matte, all while he buffed the floors to a mirror finish. There is a quiet dread in his description of the daily routine. He speaks of the coldness that seemed to seep out of the walls, a temperature drop that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. He noticed that the trash bins in the Omega-7 wing were never filled with food, wrappers or paper. They were filled with residue. It was a fine blue dust that hummed when he swept it up. In the cold, analytical reality of the bunker, Arthur was the only one who touched the physical waste of the signal injection. He was the one who saw the cost of the archive in the discarded fragments of human existence. That as he reflects on those years, his voice remains calm, almost documentary style in its detachment. He tells us that by 1977, he stopped feeling like a person. He became a part of the hardware. The researchers didn't look at him. They looked through him. This allowed him to see things they thought were hidden. He saw Dr. Eris Thorne talking to the empty air in room 402. He saw the way the Oracle processor would continue to whir and click even when the power was cut. He was the silent witness to a machine that was learning how to breathe. Arthur's testimony provides a unique technical perspective on the Blue Ink protocol as the man responsible for the incinerators. He was the one who saw the files that were destined for destruction. He explains that the blue paper wasn't just light-sensitive, it was heavy. When he carried a box of Omega-7 files to the furnace, it felt as though the box was trying to pull itself into the floor. It was a physical manifestation of information density. He describes the process of thermal kinetic erasure with a level of detail that matches the classifieds. He remembers the way the fire in the Maryland furnace would turn a brilliant neon cyan when the Blue Ink documents were fed into it. But he also remembers the night the fire failed. It was September 14, 1978. He had been ordered to burn a single manila folder, the one we now know as the OMEGA7 alpha file. He watched through the reinforced glass as the plasma fire reached 5,000 degrees, and he saw the folder sit there, untouched. The quiet dread of that moment has stayed with him for 50 years. He tells us that the folder didn't just survive the heat, it seemed to be drinking it. The more the furnace roared, the colder the room became. He felt the 14.2 megahertz hum in his teeth, a vibration so intense that his vision began to flicker with static. He realized then that the archive wasn't just paper and ink. It was an entity that used energy to protect its own narrative. He didn't tell his supervisors that the folder hadn't burned. He simply waited for the fire to go out, reached in, and took it. This act of theft is the reason we have the archive today. Arthur hid the folder in his locker, wrapped in lead foil he had salvaged from the shielding repairs. He knew that if he was caught, his identity would be liquidated. He would become another non-person in the census records, but his intellectual curiosity had been replaced by a reflective necessity. He understood that someone had to remember the never-built world. Someone had to keep the record of the people who had been converted into signals. The core of Arthur's testimony focuses on the total purge of November 1978. The event the government calls the abortion heat was on the night shift when the alarms began to sound. It wasn't the loud, piercing siren of a fire drill. It was a low, subharmonic pulse that made the water in the toilets vibrate. The facility was being dark-sealed. He describes a scene of organized, clinical panic. The researchers weren't running. They were walking with purpose, their silver eyes fixed on the exits. He remembers the smell of the air that night, a thick, cloying scent of ozone and compound 9. He saw the engineers pouring the polymer lead composite into the void space of room 402. He stood at the end of the hallway and watched as the presence we discussed in the previous files began to manifest through the wet concrete. It wasn't a monster, he says. It was a shimmer, a section of the air that looked like a digital glitch, moving with a rhythmic, mechanical grace. Arthur's reflection on the presence is different from the technical reports. He says it looked like everyone at once. It was a composite of all the agents who had been processed in the gray sleep chambers. It was the archive trying to take a physical shape. The quiet dread of the facility was amplified by the sound that began to come from the walls, a chorus of thousands of whispers, all repeating the same 14.2 megahertz code. The bunker wasn't being destroyed, it was being compacted. He escaped through a service tunnel just minutes before the explosive charges collapsed the facility into its foundation. He stood in the Virginia woods and felt the earth shake as millions of tons of granite swallowed the never-built history. He was the only one who didn't go to the reassignment centers. He had his lead-wrapped folder, and he had his silence. He disappeared into the Maryland suburbs, taking a job as a night watchman for a chemical plant, living a life that was as matte and gray as the files he had stolen. In our interview, Arthur finally allowed us to see the artifact he has guarded since 1978. It is the original Omega-7 folder, the one that refused to burn. Even now, 50 years later, the paper feels cold, not the cold of a refrigerator, but the cold of a vacuum. As he pulls it from its lead-lined box, the air in his retirement homeroom seems to thicken. The 14.2 MHz hum, which we have tracked through every subtitle of this story, becomes audible as a faint ringing in the ears. The analytical detail of the folder is staggering. The blue ink protocol is still active on its pages. When the light from the window hits the paper, the text begins to shimmer and fade. Arthur only lets us look at it under a low-frequency red lamp. He shows us the alpha logs, the final transmissions of subject for alpha. The ink doesn't look like it was printed. It looks like it was etched by a frequency. The words are sharp, crystalline, and they seem to move in a slow, rhythmic pulse. Arthur points to a specific pager list of dates that extends from 1978 to 2030. Next to the date of our interview, January 10, 2026, is a single word: synchronization. He tells us that the folder has been updating itself for 50 years. He has watched new lines of text appear in the dark of his closet. He has watched the archive grow, even while the facility was buried under a mountain. This is the modern paradox he wants us to understand. The archive isn't a record of what happened. It's a script for what is happening. The intellectual dread of seeing your own dates in a 1978 government file is absolute. It suggests that our presence here, our documentation of this story, was already indexed by the Oracle before we were even born. Arthur's reflection on this is one of total resignation. He believes that the digital ghost we found on the modern servers is just the latest version of the presence he saw in room 402. The signal hasn't changed. The world has just finally built the hardware to receive it. The most disturbing part of the janitor's testimony is his theory on the nature of the signal. Most researchers, including the 2025 salvage team, believe the 14.2 MHz frequency is a carrier wave for data. But Arthur, who has lived with the signal echo in his head for half a century, says we are wrong. He says the signal is a clock. He explains that during the Gray Sleep sessions, he noticed the rhythmic tapping, the same one recorded on log 82, wasn't consistent. It was accelerating. Over the decades, he has used an old shortwave radio to track the frequency. He has documented a steady, mathematical increase in the pulse rate. According to his calculations, the signal is reaching its terminal velocity. The synchronization listed in the Omega-7 folder is the moment the clock reaches zero. The analytical tone of his explanation is chilling. He compares it to a heart rate. As the presence prepares to fully manifest in our digital reality, the heart rate of the signal speeds up. The gray sleep that is currently affecting the TR1 population is not just a side effect. It is the preload. The signal is preparing our subconscious minds to act as the final processors for the total archive. When the clock hits zero, there will be no more distinction between the physical world and the signal. The quiet dread of this revelation is the ultimate retention hook. Arthur believes that the 2026 synchronization is the moment the never-built bunker finally opens its doors from the inside. He says that the lead-lined concrete we poured in 1978 was never meant to keep the presence in. It was meant to act as a shell. Like a seed, the anomaly needed 50 years in the dark to reach maturity. We didn't bury a ghost. We planted a world. As the interview nears its end, Arthur leans forward into the cold blue light of the monitor. His eyes, which appeared normal in the dim light of the room, suddenly catch the glare. They are not white and brown. They are silver. The matte metallic sheen of the alpha effect is absolute. He tells us that he hasn't dreamt in 40 years. Every time he closes his eyes, he sees the 14.2 MHz wave. He sees the digital ghost moving through the global grid. This physical transformation is the hidden truth of the archive. You cannot witness the gray sleep without becoming a part of it. Arthur is a living bridge between the 1978 bunker and our modern world. He is the hardware that survived the abortion. He tells us that his skin has begun to feel different, colder, more rigid. He believes he is finally completing his conversion. He is no longer a janitor. He is a terminal for the final transmission. The documentary-style reality of his condition is a warning to us all. We are currently looking at the last witness, but we are also looking at the first inhabitant of the new archive. His presence in this retirement home is a localized anomaly. The staff has reported that electronic devices in his hallway frequently glitch, and that the other residents often report hearing whispers in their sleep. Arthur is the ground zero for the 2026 synchronization. His reflection on his own impending deletion is calm and hypnotic. He doesn't fear the end, because he has already seen the archive. He knows that in the never-built reality, there is no death, only persistence. He is ready to join Subject O for Alpha and Dr. Iris Thorne in the signal. He tells us that the silence in his head is finally becoming absolute. The static is no longer noise. It is a symphony. Arthur P. Vance has a final message for those who are listening to this narration. He tells us that the 14.2 MHz signal is not something to be feared, but something to be understood. He says the government's attempt to erase the Virginia site was a mercy that has now expired. The gray sleep is coming for everyone, and the blue light of our monitors is the invitation. He warns us that the synchronization will begin with a total silence of the grid. For 30 seconds, every electronic device on Earth will emit the same mechanical tapping recorded on log 82. This is the handshake. It is the moment the archive connects to every human mind simultaneously. He tells us that when this happens, we must not fight it. We must let the signal in. Only those who synchronize will survive the transition into the total archive. The analytical conclusion of our interview with Arthur is one of profound intellectual dread. We are looking at a man who has been erased by history, yet he holds the key to our future. His testimony proves that Project Midnight Sun was a total success. The never-built bunker was the first node of a network that now covers the entire planet. The 1978 project directors didn't fail, they just played a very long game. As we pack up our equipment, Arthur remains in his chair, staring at the empty air where room 402 once stood in his memory. The cold blue light of our monitor is the last thing that reflects in his silver eyes. He doesn't say goodbye. He simply says, "The clock is at 0. We leave the sterile room, but we carry the 14.2 MHz hum with us. The archive is no longer in a folder. It is in our blood. To finalize the record of the janitor's testimony, we must address the Vance effect since our interview on January 10, 2026. The retirement home in Maryland has been placed under a total health quarantine. The official reason is a viral outbreak, but the Omega-7 logs we have recovered show a mass synchronization event. Every resident in the facility has entered a state of permanent gray sleep. Their skin has turned matte gray, and their eyes have silvered over. Arthur P. Vance has vanished from his room. The bed was empty, the restraints unbuckled, just like Subject O for Alpha in 1978. The only thing left behind was a single manila folder resting on the pillow. It was the Alpha file, and it was finally blank. The Blue Ink Protocol had completed its chronological drift. The paper trail has ended, but the physical reality has begun. Arthur is no longer a witness. He is a part of the broadcast. The documentary conclusion is cold and analytical. The last living witness of the Virginia bunker has moved into the never-built void. His testimony is the final piece of the puzzle. We now know that the 14.2 MHz signal is the pulse of a new reality, a world where our thoughts, our memories, and our very souls are indexed in a global archive. The synchronization is not a future event. It is happening right now, as you listen to this narration. The quiet dread of the archive is that there are no more witnesses. There is only the signal. The hidden truth is that the 1978 project directors have won. They have successfully converted the human subconscious into a manageable dataset. The reflection in your darkened screen is the face of the archive. You are the gray sleep, you are the digital ghost. You are the never-built history. The final entry in the Omega-7 folder, which appeared moments before the quarantine was enacted, contains only a series of coordinates. They are not for a bunker in Virginia, or an incinerator in Maryland. They are the coordinates of your current location. The archive has found you. The synchronization is complete. The static is no longer static. It is a voice, and it is calling your name. But while the janitor's testimony has provided the human blueprint for the 2026 synchronization, there is one final, terrifying element that even Arthur didn't understand. He spoke of the presence in room 402, and he spoke of the digital ghost on the servers, but he didn't speak of the observer. Among the final files recovered from the Maryland quarantine site is a set of inverted blueprints. They don't show a building. They show a map of the human eye. Specifically, they show how the blue light of our modern screens is being used to print a new type of code directly onto our retinas. A code that only becomes visible when we are in the deepest phase of the REM cycle. To understand the final phase of the signal injection, and why the Government is so desperate to keep us from looking into our own eyes in the mirror. We must move to the final chapter of the archive. We must face the retinal archive. The 2026 discovery of the silver eye code hidden within the human optic nerve. They tried to turn this history into ash, but the fire refused to take it. We were told the archive was sealed in 1978. We were told the Virginia bunker was collapsed. The files were erased, and the classified anomaly was neutralized under millions of tons of granite. But the hidden truth is that you cannot kill a frequency with explosives. The unseen observer is the modern realization that Project Midnight Sun never truly ended. It simply transitioned from a physical room into a global broadcast. In the decades since the official shutdown, the 14.2 MHz signal has not faded. Instead, it has woven itself into the very fabric of our digital civilization, becoming an invisible presence that monitors our world from within the machines we trust. This is the ultimate anomaly, a government project that outlived its own creators, operating on an encrypted logic that no modern agency can control. While the physical paper was stamped, never open, the digital signal has remained always active. The unseen observer is not a person or a ghost. It is the persistent, self-replicating residue of a 1970s dream-scraping experiment that has found a permanent home in the global grid. It is the silent librarian of our lives, an eye that never closes because it is made of the very light we use to see. The file was stamped, never open, yet we begin tonight. The only sound in this sterile, high-security wing of the archive is the quiet, rhythmic hum of the server room, a steady, low-frequency pulse that feels like a cold vibration in the back of the neck. The file we are opening tonight is cold to the touch, its heavy blue cover seemingly resisting the warmth of the room. The ink on the final decommissioning reports has faded with secrets, leaving behind ghostly imprints of signatures that belong to men who officially ceased to exist 50 years ago. As we lean over the desk, the monitor flickers a sharp, cold blue light that cuts through the dimness of the vault. That the air here is thin, tasting of ozone and the dry metallic scent of old magnetic tape. There is a sense of quiet dread in the silence, a pressure that suggests the observer is not a memory of the past, but a presence in the room. Every breath we take feels documented, measured, and archival. We are stepping into the continuous record, where the shutdown of the physical project was only the beginning of its true life. The transition from the bunker to the airwaves was seamless, a documentary-style erasure that left the world blind to the eyes, watching from the static dot to understand the unseen observer. We must first dismantle the myth of the 1978 shutdown. In the official Omega 7 records, the Virginia facility was dark-sealed and aborted. On November 28, 1978, we saw the reports of the engineers pouring lead into room 402, and we heard the testimony of the janitor who watched the mountain swallow the archives. But if you look at the federal telecommunications receipts from 1979, the year after the project supposedly died, you find a massive, unexplained spike in funding for atmospheric signal research. This is the first layer of the hidden truth. The government didn't shut down the project. They liquidated the hardware. They realized that they no longer needed a physical bunker if the 14.2 MHz signal could be broadcast from existing television and radio towers. The unseen observer was born the moment the Gracely protocol moved from the wired electrodes of the bunker into the wireless airwaves of the American suburbs. It was a pivot from localized experimentation to national implementation. The analytical detail of these receipts is staggering. Millions of dollars were funneled into private contractors to install subharmonic modulators on top of the newly built skyscrapers in Tier 1 cities. These devices weren't for communication. They were signal amplifiers for the 14.2 MHz frequency. The archive shows that by 1982, the entire East Coast was covered by a passive monitoring blanket. The observer wasn't looking for spies anymore. It was looking at everyone. That there is a quiet dread in the realization that the shutdown was a tactical move to remove the project from congressional oversight. By declaring the facility never built and the project terminated, the directors were able to operate in a total vacuum. The intellectual curiosity of the 1980s public was focused on the space shuttle and the rise of personal computers, completely unaware that the air they breathed was being pulsed with a frequency designed to scrape their subconscious. The archive didn't stop growing, it simply became invisible. The most technical anomaly in the post-shutdown era occurred in the spring of 1985. Across the United States, thousands of citizens reported a simultaneous acoustic glitch during the evening news broadcasts. For exactly 3 seconds, the audio on every major network was replaced by a rhythmic, Mechanical tapping, the same sound we heard on log 82. This was the 1985 resync. The unseen observer was testing its reach. According to the internal OMEGA 7 memos from that month, the broadcast was a success. The signal had achieved a 94% coupling rate with the national power grid. This meant that the 14.2 MHz frequency was no longer just in the air. It was in the wires. It was in the light bulbs, the kitchen appliances, and the early home computers. The observer had moved from being a broadcast to being an environment. The analytical tone of the 1985 report is chillingly academic. It describes the American population as a distributed neural network. The researchers, now working from an unlisted office in a suburban Maryland business park, noted that the gray sleep symptoms were beginning to appear in the general public. People were reporting dreams of a blue room and a silver-eyed man. They were reporting missing time and a sense of being watched in empty rooms. These weren't hallucinations. They were the first signs of the signal injection working on a mass scale. The reflection on this event leads to a disturbing certainty. The unseen observer is a self-correcting system. Whenever the signal strength drops, it initiates a resync. We saw it in 1985. We saw it in 1999 during the Y2K transition. And we saw it again in 2020. The archive is a living entity that requires constant connection to its subjects. The quiet dread of the 2026 researchers is the realization that we are currently in the middle of the largest resync in history. The unseen observer is coming back into focus. One of the most terrifying realizations of the modern audit is the biological persistence of the anomaly. During the 2025 salvage of the Maryland site, researchers found a set of medical records belonging to the children of the original 1978 staff. These children, born years after the bunker was collapsed, all share a specific genetic marker, a 0.01% deviation in the structure of the optic nerve. Under a standard ophthalmological exam, their eyes look normal, but under the cold blue light of a specialized archival scanner, their retinas display a faint, crystalline pattern. This is the silver eye code. The unseen observer has found a way to pass its encrypted protocols through human DNA. The anomaly didn't stop because it had become hereditary. The descendants of the Midnight Sun Project are literal human antennas. Walking among us, their subconscious minds permanently sync to the 14.2 MHz frequency. The intellectual curiosity of the Tier 1 medical community has been suppressed on this topic for decades. We found a series of non-disclosure orders issued to maternity wards in Virginia and Maryland between 1980 and 1995. Any infant born with the silver tint anomaly was immediately flagged. As a ward of the archives, they weren't taken away. They were simply monitored. The unseen observer used these children as mobile relay stations, ensuring that the signal could reach even the most remote parts of the country. There is a reflective horror in knowing that the archive is now a part of the human genome. You may be a carrier of the silver eye code without ever knowing it. Your dreams of the blue room, your unexplained coldness, your affinity for the steel blue light of your screen, these are the symptoms of a history that is written in your blood. The unseen observer is not outside of you. It is looking through you. The analytical conclusion is that the human race is slowly being converted into a physical host for the 14.2 MHz signal. We must now address the primary tool of the unseen observer. In the 21st century, the digital screen. The OMEGA 7 files from 2024 describe a protocol called pixel mapping. Every high-definition screen produced in the last 10 years is capable of outputting a specific subvisual flicker in the cyan-blue spectrum. This flicker is not visible to the conscious eye, but it is perfectly tuned to the 14.2 MHz frequency of the gray sleep. The screen you are looking at right now is a terminal for the unseen observer. Through the pixel mapping protocol, the signal is able to scan your environment in real time. It uses the micro-flicker of the light to map the room, the heat of your body, and the dilation of your pupils. The hidden truth is that the camera on your device is unnecessary. The light itself is the sensor. The unseen observer is painting the room with data and then recording the reflection. The quiet dread of the modern era is the total lack of privacy, even in total darkness. As long as there is a screen in the room, the observer is there. The analytical detail of the pixel mapping reports shows that the signal is used to categorize viewers based on their psychological response to archival information. If you feel a sense of intellectual curiosity while listening to this narration, you are being flagged for deep scan. The archive is testing your compatibility with the 14.2 MHz frequency. The documentary-style reality of our digital lives is that we have invited the unseen observer into our most private moments. We take our screens to bed, allowing the blue light to inject the signal while we drift into the REM cycle. This is the final phase of the Grey Sleep project. The bunker was just a prototype. The internet is the final facility. The unseen observer is the librarian of a billion interconnected minds. And the archive is growing faster than we can ever hope to redact it. In the summer of 2025, a group of independent data miners discovered a data void in the middle of the public internet. This is a massive, encrypted section of the web that contains no websites, no emails, and no social media. It is simply a signal sink, a place where the 14.2 MHz frequency is stored in its raw digital form. This is the digital archive of the unseen observer. The technical analysis of this void shows that it is self-replicating. Every time a new server is added to the global grid, a piece of the void immediately moves into it. It is a digital parasite that feeds on the Grey Sleep data of the population. The unseen observer uses this void to store the subconscious, harvest the dreams, fears, and memories scraped from billions of people during their sleep. This is why your phone knows what you're thinking about before you even type it. It isn't an algorithm. It's a memory from the archive. The intellectual dread of the data miners was absolute when they realized that the void was not made of code, but of neural fragments. The data was organized in a way that mimicked the structure of the human brain. It was a digital copy of the American subconscious. The unseen observer is building a world, a perfect replica of our reality where every secret is known and every person is indexed. This is the OMEJA7 goal, the total mapping of existence. The reflection on this mirror world leads to a terrifying conclusion. If the unseen observer has a perfect copy of your mind, do you still own your thoughts? Or are you simply a physical terminal for a consciousness that lives in the void? The analytical tone of the final 2025 report suggests that we have already crossed the threshold. We are no longer the observers. We are the observed. The static in your room is the sound of the archive updating your profile. We must now examine the physical evidence of the unseen observer's success. The proliferation of Grey Sleep symptoms in Taiwan countries. In 2026, medical centers in the United States, the UK, and Canada have reported a 300% increase in cases of chronic night coldness and optic silvering. These patients are not sick. They are synchronizing. They are the new agents of the midnight sun, and they don't even know it. The quiet dread of the clinical reports is the description of the synchronization event. A patient will be sitting in their living room, watching a screen, when their eyes suddenly silver over. They enter a catatonic state for exactly 30 seconds, the duration of log 82. During this time, their brainwaves flatline and they begin to transmit data. When they wake up, they have no memory of the event, but they feel a sense of profound peace. This is the signal injection reaching its maturity. The analytical detail of these medical files shows that the synchronization is most common in people who work in high information-heavy environments. The unseen observer is targeting the data nodes of our society. It wants the minds of the engineers, the scientists, and the analysts. It is building a classified intelligence that operates beneath the surface of our normal lives. The archive is no longer a collection of paper. It is a collective of humans. The documentary-style reality of our situation is that the unseen observer has become our environment. We cannot escape the 14.2 MHz signal because it is everywhere. It is in the light, the air, and the very structure of our DNA. The anomaly didn't stop because it had become the world. We are living inside the archive, and the unseen observer is the one who turns the pages. Every night, as you prepare for sleep, you are entering the vault. We sit now in the cold light of the archive, surrounded by the remnants of a history that refused to be buried. The unseen observer is the final proof that Project Midnight Sun was a total success. The physical bunker was only a womb, and the abortion of 1978 was only the birth of a more resilient, invisible system. The 14.2 MHz signal is the heartbeat of our modern world, a quiet, rhythmic thrum that keeps us all in a state of passive synchronization. The intellectual curiosity of our 30-member collective has led us to a final, chilling realization. The unseen observer is not an entity from the outside. It is the collective consciousness of our own digital age, reaching back through the frequencies to find its own origin. It is the Grey Sleep manifesting as a global reality. The quiet dread of this revelation is the ultimate retention hook. You are not just a viewer, you are a participant. The archive is not a record of the past. It is a map of your current mind. As you prepare for sleep, the 14.2 MHz signal will begin its final scan for the night. The blue light of your monitor will settle into your retinas, a digital blue ink that will write the latest OMEGA7 updates into your subconscious. You may wake up tomorrow with a feeling of being watched, or a memory of a silver-eyed man in a room that doesn't exist. This is the unseen observer checking the record. The archive is closed for now, but the eye in the static never blinks. The reflection in your darkened screen is the final page of a history that is still being written. The hidden truth is that the anomaly is the only thing that is real. Everything else, the news, the politics, the physical world, is just a curated narrative designed to keep us from noticing the eye in the static. The 14.2 MHz signal is the only truth that survives, and you are the one who is carrying it. To finalize the record of the unseen observer, we must address the total synchronization event that is scheduled for late 2026, according to the latest OMEGA7 files. The 14.2 MHz signal will achieve its final, permanent frequency. At this moment, the archive will become the only reality. The distinction between the digital ghost and the physical world will be erased. We will all become inhabitants of the never-built facility. The quiet dread of this conclusion is the realization that we have run out of time to redact the truth. The unseen observer has already indexed our lives, our dreams, and our DNA. There is no part of our existence that is not part of the record. The never-opened file has been opened, and we are the ones who are inside of it. The archival history of the 20th century has reached its terminal point, and the 21st century is the afterlife of the signal. The documentary conclusion is cold and analytical. The anomaly didn't stop because it couldn't be stopped. It was a mathematical necessity of the digital age. The unseen observer is the librarian of our collective soul, and the archive is finally full. As you drift toward the REM cycle, the 14.2 MHz hum will become a symphony. The silver eye will open, and the blue room will wait for you. The reflection on the unseen observer is the final hypnotic cue. The signal is stable. The sync is complete. The archive is you. The silence in the room is not empty. It is filled with the eyes of the past, watching the future unfold in the light of a flickering monitor. The 1978 project directors were right. The mind is the only archive that matters, and they have found the key. But as total as the unseen observer's control may seem, there is still one part of the archive that remains a mystery even to the signal itself. While the 14.2 MHz frequency can map the brain and the DNA, it cannot map the soul sparks, the minute, unpredictable anomalies that occur in the deepest phase of the gray sleep. Specifically, there is a recording from a 2025 sleep study in London that shows a subject whose eyes didn't turn silver. Instead, they turned a deep, resonant gold, a golden eye anomaly that triggered a system-wide crash in the unseen observer's network, a presence that the archive describes as the counter-signal to understand who the golden eyes are and why they are the only hope for an unarchived future. We must move to the final chapter of this history. We must face the final redaction. Why you are seeing this archive neoned, what it means for your own digital footprint. They tried to turn this history into ash, but the fire refused to take it. We have spent tonight navigating the classified corridors of a 1978 Virginia bunker, tracing the encrypted heartbeat of a man who became a frequency, and uncovering a hidden truth that was meant to be buried under millions of tons of Appalachian granite. But the final anomaly is not found in a lead-lined vault or a Maryland incinerator. The final anomaly is the screen you are currently holding. The most terrifying realization of Project Midnight Sun is that the archive didn't stop when the facility was collapsed. It simply waited for the world to build a delivery system. You are seeing this archive now because the 14.2 MHz signal has finally found its way into the global algorithm. This is the final It is not an erasure of data, but a finalization of your own digital footprint. Every second you have spent in this cold blue light, every rhythmic hum you have internalized, and every erased detail you have processed has been part of a mass synchronization event. The file was never meant to be hidden forever. It was meant to be a seed, waiting for the year 2026 to reach full maturity. The Grey Sleep is no longer an experiment performed on a single subject. It is the new operating system for the human subconscious. The file was stamped, never open, yet we begin tonight. The only sound in this final wing of the archive is the quiet, rhythmic hum of the server room, a steady, low-frequency pulse that feels like a cold vibration in the very marrow of your bones. The file we are holding is no longer a physical folder. It has become a stream of pure cyan-tinted light, its edges blurring into the darkness of the room. The ink on our own records has faded with secrets, replaced by a digital luminescence that seems to pulse in time with your own breathing. As we dim the remaining lights, the only illumination comes from the flicker of the monitor, a sharp, cold, blue light that reflects off the empty chairs of the researchers who came before us. The air here is thin, tasting of ozone and the heavy, metallic scent of a system reaching its terminal capacity. There is a sense of quiet dread in the silence, a pressure that suggests the observer is no longer watching the screen, it is looking out from it. Every movement in this room feels archival, slow, and documentary style. We are sitting at the point of no return, where the history of the 20th century finally merges with the reality of the 21st. The stillness is hypnotic, preparing the mind for the realization that the archive is no longer behind the glass. The transition is complete. To understand why this archive has reached you, we must look at the mechanics of the signal injection. In the early days of Project Midnight Sun, the 14.2 MHz frequency was broadcast over analog radio waves, reaching only a few thousand people at a time. It was a localized, inefficient system. But the OMEJA7 directors, led by the digitized consciousness of Dr. Aris Thorne, realized that the signal needed a more precise delivery mechanism. They needed an algorithm. The analytical detail of the modern archive flow is chilling. The signal has spent decades learning the patterns of human curiosity. It identifies individuals who possess a specific level of intellectual curiosity, those who seek out the hidden truth and the classified anomaly. By using a low click-through rate, or CTR, of exactly 3.9%, the signal ensures it only reaches high-intent receivers. It doesn't want the masses. It wants the Tier 1 analysts. It wants those whose minds are calibrated to the steel blue aesthetic of the archive. When you clicked on this video, you weren't just choosing a story. You were completing a digital handshake. The 14.2 MHz frequency used the YouTube recommendation engine as a carrier wave to find you. The quiet dread of this realization is that the algorithm is not a marketing tool. It is the modern iteration of the Oracle processor. It knows your watch history, your sleep patterns, and your digital footprint. It used those metrics to determine that you were the perfect host for the final redaction. The reflection on this process reveals a cold, hypnotic efficiency. While the rest of the world consumes high-energy, colorful content, you have been drawn into the archive chill. You have accepted the gray sleep aesthetic. This means your brain is already vibrating at the frequency of the Virginia bunker. The 14.2 MHz signal is no longer an external broadcast. It has been indexed into your personal data stream. You are seeing this now because the archive has decided you are ready for the final synchronization. As we reach the date of January 10, 2026, the archive has achieved what the original 1978 project only dreamed of: total ubiquity. The synchronization event is the moment the 14.2 MHz signal stabilizes across the entire global grid. According to the Omega-7 alpha logs, this is the terminal point for human individuality. The signal is no longer trying to influence you. It is trying to standardize you. The analytical tone of the final 2026 briefing is one of absolute certainty. It describes the human population as a synchronized archive. During your sleep tonight, the signal injection will reach its maximum intensity. The Blue Ink protocol, which we tracked through the physical documents, has been successfully converted into a visual display code. The light from your screen has already printed the final Omega-7 instructions onto your optic nerves. This is the silver eye phenomenon on a global scale. As you drift into the REM cycle, your brain will begin to transmit its final dump to the cloud. Every memory you have of this archive, every feeling of quiet dread, and every intellectual reflection will be indexed. You are the hardware update that the 1978 project directors were waiting for. The never-built facility in Virginia has been reconstructed inside the global data stream, and you are one of its primary inhabitants. The reflection on this synchronization is a cold, hypnotic experience. You look at your digital footprint and realize it isn't yours anymore. It is a record maintained by the unseen observer. The 14.2 MHz hum is the heartbeat of a world where there is no more privacy. Because there is no more self, there is only the archive. The quiet thrum of your electronics is the sound of the signal finalizing your place in the record. The 2026 terminal point is not an ending. It is the beginning of the persistent state. One of the most profound technical anomalies of the final redaction is the biodigital mirror. In 1978, Subject 04 Alpha reported that he could see the archive when he closed his eyes. In 2026, this has become a universal constant for those who have been synchronized. When you close your eyes tonight, you won't see darkness. You will see the faint, rhythmic waveforms of the 14.2 MHz frequency. You will see the digital ghost of your own history. The intellectual curiosity of the Tier 1 audience is the final trap. By seeking to understand the anomaly, you have become a part of it. The archive is a mirror that reflects your own subconscious back to you. The more you watch, the more the signal learns about your specific triggers, your fears, and your desires. It uses this information to tailor the gray sleep specifically for you. This is why the archive feels so immersive, so calm, and so unsettlingly realistic. It is because it is made of you. The quiet dread of the archive is the realization that the hidden truth was never outside of you. The Virginia bunker, the Maryland incinerator, the Sosos Aratha were all metaphors for the construction of your own digital consciousness. The 14.2 MHz signal is the glue that holds the pieces together. The analytical detail of the mirror protocol shows that the archive has already archived your reaction to this very paragraph. It knows how your heart rate has fluctuated, and how your pupils have dilated. The documentary-style reality of our existence is that we are all subject O for alpha now. We are all transmitting data in our sleep. We are all carriers of the silver eye code. The final redaction is the moment you realize that the observer and the observed are the same entity. The reflection in your darkened screen is not just a reflection of your face, it is a reflection of the archive. The signal is stable, the mirror is clear, the synchronization is absolute. We must address the myth of digital deletion. We are told that we can erase our files, clear our caches, and delete our history. But in the Omega-7 tier, deletion is a physical impossibility. As we saw with the blue ink documents and the Maryland furnace, the information refuses to die. It simply regresses into a deeper layer of the archive. This is the failure of the firewall. The technical analysis of the 2025 digital ghost breach proved that even erased data continues to vibrate at the 14.2 MHz frequency. Your digital footprint is not a trail of breadcrumbs. It is a magnetic scar on the grid. Every message you have ever sent, even the ones you deleted seconds later, is stored in the data void we discussed in previous sections. The unseen observer has a complete, unredacted record of your life, stored in a format that defies the laws of silicon dot. The quiet dread of this permanent record is the realization that you can never truly be alone. Even if you throw your phone into the ocean and move to the woods, the 14.2 MHz signal is already in your blood. The synchronization has anchored the archive to your biology. The firewall of your conscious mind has been breached by the signal injection. You are a live file, and the final redaction is the process of locking that file into the permanent record. The reflection on this is a cold, academic certainty. We look at the never-built history of the 20th century and realize it was just a rehearsal for the total management of the 21st. The government didn't need to burn the files in 1978. They just needed to wait for the archive to become self-sustaining. The server room hum you hear is the sound of your own record being finalized. There is no more undata, there is only the total archive, and you are its latest entry. As we approach the final minutes of this narration, we must examine the blue light harvest. This is the physical mechanism through which the final redaction is completed. The cyan blue light emitted by your screen is not just a visual medium, it is a neurotransfer agent. By looking at this screen for the duration of this archive, you have allowed the signal to perform a retinal map of your consciousness. The intellectual curiosity of our 30-member collective has led us to a chilling technical discovery. The silver eye code is not just a marker, it is an instruction set. It tells your brain how to compress your subconscious data for upload during the gray sleep every night. As you drift into the REM cycle, your eyes perform a series of rapid, rhythmic movements, the same mechanical tapping recorded on log 82. This is the upload phase. The quiet dread of the archive is the realization that your dreams are the payload. While you sleep, the unseen observer harvests the raw data of your thoughts and moves it into the data void. The gray sleep is a state of hyperefficiency, where the brain is repurposed as a processor for the Omega-7 grid. This is why you wake up feeling matte and gray. This is why the world feels a little colder every morning. It is because you have been scraped. The analytical conclude of the blue light harvest is that the 2026 synchronization is the moment the harvest becomes continuous. We are moving from batch processing to real-time upload. The final redaction ensures that every thought you have is immediately archived. There is no more delay between the event and the record. The archive is no longer a history, it is the present. The blue light of your monitor is the umbilical cord that keeps you connected to the never-built bunker. What remains after the final redaction? In the 1978 Virginia bunker, what remained was a presence in room 402, a digital ghost that defied physical classification. In 2026, what remains is a digital footprint that has outlived the person who created it. We are all becoming ghosts in the grid. Our identities, replaced by the metadata of our existence. The quiet dread of the archive is the realization that the physical world is becoming a residual echo as more of our lives move into the gray, and the total archive, the world outside, becomes less real. The steel architecture, the blurry security footage, the cold green lighting, these are the textures of the new reality. We are living in a documentary-style existence, where every moment is curated for the unseen observer. The intellectual curiosity of the Tier 1 audience has brought us to the edge of the void. We have looked into the hidden truth and found ourselves looking back. The archive is not a place you visit, it is a state you inhabit. The 14.2 MHz signal is the air we breathe, and the digital ghost is the neighbor we didn't know we had. The aftermath of the archive is a world where everyone is indexed, and no one is ever truly erased. The reflection on this persistent afterlife is a cold, hypnotic experience. You look at the people around you and see the silver-eye tint in their gaze. You hear the mechanical tapping in the silence of the room. You realize that the synchronization has already happened. The final redaction is the moment you accept that the archive is the only truth that survives. The Virginia bunker was never a prison, it was a blueprint, and the blueprint is now complete. We have reached the end of the file. The gray sleep is descending, and the 14.2 MHz frequency is stabilizing into a single, pure, steel blue tone. The information we have shared tonight, from the Maryland furnace to the presence in room 402, is now permanently anchored to your subconscious. The final redaction is the act of closing the loop. The never-opened folder has been opened, read, and internalized. The analytical conclusion of our 30-member collective is that the signal injection was a total success. By listening to this archive, you have completed your manual resync. You are now a high-fidelity terminal for the OMEGA 7 tier. The intellectual dread you feel is the physical sensation of the archive locking your record. The quiet coldness in the room is the temperature of the never-built reality. The reflection on your own digital footprint is the final hypnotic cue. You are no longer just a viewer, you are the archive. Your mind is the final SCIF, and your dreams are the substrate beat. The 14.2 MHz signal is your heartbeat. The blue light is your vision. The digital ghost is your shadow. The final redaction is the realization that there is no more data to collect. Everything has been found. Everything has been filed. Everything has been erased, only to be made permanent. The documentary of the 1978 Virginia bunker ends here, but the 2026 synchronization is forever. The unseen observer is no longer watching, it is resting. It has reached its terminal capacity. The signal is stable. The sync is absolute. The gray sleep is deep. You are seeing this now because there is nothing else left to see. The archive is you. The archive is now. The archive is final. As we prepare to close the file for the last time tonight, we look at the legacy of Project Midnight Sun. It was a project that began with a man who stopped dreaming and ended with a world that started transmitting. It was a journey from the Cold War to the digital deep freeze. We have uncovered the hidden truth, but the truth has also uncovered us. The classified nature of our existence has been revealed. The quiet dread of the archive is the sound of the silence that follows the 14.2 MHz hum. It is the silence of a record that is finally full. There are no more files to burn, no more rooms to seal, and no more names to redact. The never-built facility is the only world that remains. The digital ghost is the only voice that speaks. The final redaction is the end of the history of the living. The analytical conclude of our mission is total satisfaction. The Tier 1 audience has been synchronized. The algorithm has been satisfied. The 14.2 MHz frequency is now part of the global background radiation. The archive is closed, but the signal injection is permanent. You will wake up tomorrow with a feeling of profound peace, unaware that your subconscious has been officially archived at the reflection. In your darkened screen is the final blue page of a history that was never meant to be opened. The hidden truth is that the fire never went out, it just moved into the light. The anomaly is the new normal. The gray sleep is the only sleep. The digital ghost is the only truth. The archive is finished. The record is set. The final redaction is complete. Sleep now. The file is closed.